Adam, welcome to the pod. You have been a property investor is around 15 years.
Yeah, 2011 I started taking it seriously.
From that point of 2011, you scaled to 700 houses, 800 deals.
That's 850 deals I'm on now, yeah.
So you've been slacking a bit. You've got a master's from Oxford. You've got a master's from University of Warwick. All that said, why should people listen to you today?
I think I'm told normally I'm pretty good at translating fairly abstract concepts into actionable information. I saved millions of pounds from following my own advice across my group of businesses, you know. Yeah, but not every property person follows their own advice, let's face it. I got bullied a lot because, well, I was a year ahead, not very tall anyway. Then I remember one summer particularly, I kind of went through puberty within about 2 months. And back as like a kid, I put on about 3 stone. Was put in the rugby team, was suddenly I was way ahead and then stopped again, which was disappointing.
I've got a cool question I haven't heard anyone ask you later, so I think you'll enjoy it.
And then I put my left ankle on the floor and collapsed because my left ankle had completely gone. What happened is all my ligaments had gone. And then the paramedics arrived and like paramedics do, they were like, oh, looking at those tyre tracks, we thought this would be body bags, lads. You know, you've done well here. And it's kind of like, I don't think we've done well here. I mean, by the end of that 8 weeks, when I was allowed to put weight on it again, I'd made 10 grand. I was then happy that those, I call them my 4 pillars of property investment, that I had deals, money, financial structuring, really, a bit more than just money, optimization, asset management and management. If I'd done that MBA 10 years earlier, goodness knows what would have happened, but I didn't, so don't worry about it.
Yeah, if you could just talk into the debt side.
The debt side, that's relatively easy conversation. Thick end of 40 million quid. How do you sleep well at night? Well, little do you know, when Liz Truss is in charge, not very well, realised that what stopped people in growth, in business, not just in property, was either...
Adam, welcome to the pod.
Thanks for having me, Dylan.
A pleasure. Thank you so much for coming down. I know you're a busy guy, and I really appreciate the time. But just for those that don't know you, I think it would just be cool to just start with an introduction, just so people get a feel for what you've done, what you've accomplished. I mean, I went through a summary of some of the things you've done. Correct me where I'm wrong. You have been a property investor is around 15 years.
Yeah, 2011 I started taking it seriously. Yeah.
Yeah. And from that point of 2011, you scaled to 700 houses, 800 deals?
That's 850 deals I'm on now, yeah.
Okay. So you've been slacking a bit in that time.
Bit lazy,
but but then you've got a master's from Oxford. You've got a master's from University of Warwick in business. It's very impressive what you've accomplished. So with all that said, why should people listen to you today? What value do you think you can add to them?
Well, I think I'm told normally I'm pretty good at translating fairly abstract concepts into actionable information. And I've lived in a world, I love academia. I'm a frustrated professor. One of the reasons I do what I do, right? I love learning. I love education. But one of the things that frustrates me about academia is that people pontificate and talk and don't do. On the flip side, some people do too much sometimes, and like, instilling a mentality of execution is critical, right? But doing regardless of what the rules are and the laws are is also problematic, and we see a bit of. So I try and find a nice, happy middle ground, and hopefully make things make sense to people, including macroeconomic concepts that can be sometimes quite abstract. But why should we care about unemployment? Why should we care about inflation? Things like that. I'm obsessed with that stuff. Write about it every week, talk about it every day. So that hopefully will be useful, value add for anyone listening.
Absolutely. I mean, the thing is, and just from the outset, I just want to say to anyone listening is that you have saved me personally. It must be over 100, 200,000 pounds just in interest payments because of your advice 3 years ago, looking at the macroeconomics of interest rates, that kind of thing. So I'm very grateful. And I know across the board, other investors that we're mutual friends with who have saved, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of pounds. And because of your advice, when everyone was saying one thing and, that it's your advice is so practical, but where did that desire come from? Where did that passion for knowledge, for macroeconomics come from? Because it's quite a unique skill set that you have, which I don't see in many property investors.
No, I think that is a bit of a niche space of one. I figured I wanted to be the best in the world at something, so I'll just do something nobody else does. And then by definition, I'm the best in the world. I'm also the worst in the world and the most average in the world at it. But in seriousness, the passion for knowledge, I think, was instilled in me from a young age. And I'm very, very grateful to my parents for that, especially my mother, who I think made me love learning at an early age. And that just served me in really good stead. I was like a sponge when I was at school. And I love, apart from anything else, the world we live in, YouTube has an unlimited amount of content on there to learn from. Obviously, you've got to be careful about who you listen to, and that's a different conversation. But you can learn every single day to your heart's content. And so that bit I absolutely love. The other thing that really drove me was around the time of the pandemic. The general conventional wisdom that was coming out of your larger forecasting houses and big international global property companies was saying things like the market was going to go down 44%, I remember at one point. And this wasn't helping, Dylan, because it was a stressful time for anybody. Everyone had their own pandemic and all the rest of it. But when you're exposed to tens of millions of pounds worth of bank debt, apart from anything else, and you don't know what the way forward is going to be, you don't know if anyone's going to have a job. I'm talking about that time before furlough, before the government fired the gun and said, we'll sort everything out. Don't worry, whatever it takes. Those three magic words, whatever it takes, which means big stimulus is coming, But before inflation. That, I couldn't, I wasn't sleeping that well. And I couldn't find anywhere anything that would help me pragmatically run my businesses in this moment of crisis. We hadn't prepared for a pandemic. I don't know that many people had. If they had, well done. You were better prepared than I.
No, we had it all planned out. 2020, perfect vision.
So I thought, right, it's the old, I can't find what I want anywhere else. I've got these skills from the degrees that I've done and things like that. I did a bit of politics as part of one of my degrees. And again, that had stayed very latent until Brexit happened. And then that got very much more interesting again. So politics and economics are intrinsically intertwined, and I thought, I already got a few people following me on social media. I was putting some loose thoughts out that were somewhat organized. I thought I could take this to a bit of a different level here, and make sure I produce something once a week that people can read. And all I know is it will get me into some great conversations and meet some great people. And that's ultimately what it's done with you, our mutual friends. Wouldn't know them if I didn't do the supplement. So that in its own is worth doing. And it warms my heart to hear, because I saved millions of pounds from following my own advice across my group of businesses, but not every property person follows their own advice. Let's face it.
This is true.
So it's fantastic to hear that it's helped other people as well as it helped me. And it's good to, when you have a very strong conviction, and I am one of those people who thinks he's right all the time, but likewise, I like to be proven wrong. I like to be wrong. I said the base rate would be cut twice this year. It's been cut 4 times. This year. Good news, because it's better to be cut than not. But ultimately, where the mortgage rates have gone, I was correct about. I didn't see the full flow in front of me in terms of how things were going to play out with the swap rates and things like that. But I want to iterate. I want to get better. The thing I enjoy most about getting up in the morning is I'm going to have a day of learning. Every day I realise I know less than I did the day before, because there's more to learn,
Well, there's that saying, anyone who's mastered any field of any sort realizes how much they don't know in that area, and any expert you learn from. But I think with your knowledge, and I want to just go into your origin story firstly, but just with the amount of knowledge that you put out, it was incredible, because I looked for it everywhere. And I remember a friend sending me your supplement and starting to read it in that time when it was just chaos, and just needing some level-headed fundamental investing rules that you could follow and trust, and also make your own decisions. But all of the predictions, I remember your one article you went through how banks, that you get all these articles, fear-mongering, where it's, property prices are going to drop by this amount, that amount, all of that. And just having some level-headed, the questions that people don't ask. And we have all these social media influencers and that saying this, and they're just following that mainstream narrative.
Absolutely.
But you have a guy like yourself coming in and going totally against the tide, because no one else was really saying what you were saying that I know about, at that time. And it's genuinely changed many people's lives. So I think it's incredible to see the impact that can have on your own passion, to know stuff, to grow, to learn. But then passing that on, like you say, in a very tangible way, practical way, where I'm like, okay, what do I do? And you just like, here's what I'm doing. I'm fixing for 5 years and taking off variable rates and all of these things. And it's literally changed lives. Yeah. So it's incredible. But would you mind just taking us back a bit to your origin story? So where did you grow up? Did you grow up in an entrepreneurial family? What's your background there?
No, a very traditional nuclear family.
Mm-hmm.
So while we were children, mum had worked before, didn't work while we were growing up. Dad was a mid-level accountant who later in life was more, the inspiration went the other way around, and he went self-employed later in his career, which was great because he really enjoyed that before he came to retirement. So he specialised in tax and trusts towards the end of his career, which I found helpful for things like corporate structures, and definitely got a bit of osmosis. We used to share an office at one point in time. Right. So he had a one-man band operation, and we had a different business at the time. So a lot of that rubbed off, which was really handy. Like I said, really, education was definitely, still is, I think, my mum's highest value. When she did start working, when we were a bit more grown up, myself and my brother, she became a tutor. So she was never a teacher, but she should have been a teacher. And she loves knowledge, and very much one of her favourite things. So we watch University Challenge, for example. So she wasn't. Neither of my parents were degree educated, but they both should have been. It was just a sign of the times of when they grew up. Really, my dad was working class. My mum was an only child who was born in London and was brought to the Midlands because her father, my maternal grandfather, was recruited by H. Samuels, the jewellers, to run their manufacturing department. So he used to work in Hatton Garden. He was a jeweller, and he came to Birmingham. So that's why my dad's family had been in Birmingham for hundreds of years. So that's why we were Birmingham, and then moved to Solihull when I was around 6 years old. I was lucky enough, because of the inherent advantages that I was given in terms of the education, I got 100% scholarship to a local private school, which was incredible. It gave me a real different perspective on things in terms of, those are the days when kids were still allowed to bully people, So I still got bullied a lot. I got bullied a lot because, I was a year ahead. I was, there's not an easy way to say this without sounding arrogant, unfortunately, but I found school effortless. I didn't find it challenging at all, but I didn't behave badly. I was certainly capable of, I did when I was a teenager, but not when I was a younger kid. So I didn't struggle with any of the academic stuff, but also because I was a year up and I'm not very tall anyway, my family aren't very tall. I was tiny, so I was picked on for being smart and small. But then I learned was how to have a fast mouth, which defended me for quite a bit. And then I remember one summer, particularly for whatever reason, I kind of went through puberty within about 2 months. So I came home from school still a tiny boy, and went back as like I put on about 3 stone. Was put in the rugby team. Was suddenly I was way ahead. Broke the school sprint record, stuff like that. So I suddenly had this sort of, and then stopped again, which is disappointing. Otherwise, maybe I could have played rugby for a career, which would have been great. But that was sort of the background. I then was lucky. I got a scholarship again to a secondary school, and my brother did also. So my parents were not in a position to be able to afford private education, but we got it, and it's something I'm passionate about in terms of something I want to be able to do, set up bursaries and things like that for kids to be able to get into the private system. Not that popular these days, thanks to the VAT and all the rest of it. There's some very ideological stuff that goes on around that, but I think you're often, whatever your own experience was is how you feel about things. So I had a look at the parents who were driving flash cars. It wasn't like it is these days, but there were still Range Rovers and things like that around. My mum had a Datsun Sunny where there was a fudge wrapper that used to stop the water from coming in. Didn't really do a great job because it was a fudge wrapper, right? But that showed, sort of where we were at in comparison to. But it was never that side of things never really felt any different. But it put me into that network, and this is something that I came to realise with clarity when I did my Masters in Business Administration. Is that education really is a third, if that, of going to an educational environment. The rest is the network of the people that you're going to be around, and then the soft skills that it can help you develop. Because what private education does is it knocks out kids who are confident, aside from anything else, right? A very small percentage of them are entitled, far fewer than a lot of people think, I think. And what you do, and what I've observed from my peers, because there's some very good state schools where I live, some very strong ones, some of the best in the country at certain points in time. And there's some very good private schools, and there's some very good grammar schools. So it's a nice area where you've got a lot of choices in terms of what you can do. But you can quite literally, the 1,000 odd people I know and remember from school They go into buckets of the very best private schools. They went and worked globally. They often went and worked in the Middle East, sign of the times, or they were investment bankers and things like that. My own peers, because at the time my school was a secondary independent, it wasn't sort of the top of the top. They went and worked in London, sometimes went and worked abroad, did very well for themselves. Local state school pupils more stayed where they'd grown up and still did well, had fine careers and things like that. And one of the bits of work I've done over time for charity is help schools, now the academy format is a thing, engage with local industry to say, look, you want to go to the state schools and work with those people are your workforce of the future. They're much less likely to move a million miles away from home, right? So they'll come back if they've been to uni, if they haven't been to uni, get them at both ends of the spectrum, And then the odd ones who were, like I say, I saw this more, to be honest, when I went to Oxford. Entitlement was a big deal. And people who, and also didn't have role models. We often see this and think about this, I think, in society at the broken family end of the spectrum or at the care side of things. People don't have role models, both female and male, certainly male, because normally the female's left picking up the pieces and all the rest of it. So there's lots and lots of research and lots of talk about that. But what there isn't a lot of talk of, because I think people struggle to sympathise, is when not necessarily dad, but often dad has had an incredibly powerful international career and just never been around, and the kids are brought up by the au pair or the nanny or whatever. There's no real structure, and they do grow up with, they're never going to worry about money. They live in a mansion. They've got a maid who cooks dinner for them. What are you expecting if you don't do the level of parenting that you do? And that's kind of made a big impression on me over the years, because I think often people who are obsessive have extreme levels of success, whereas really I think what's worth striving for is probably balance rather than just insane, levels that this, that, and the other. Because I don't think you put great human beings around you necessarily, and I think it's more important to have good people around you. And I take my responsibilities as a father, more important than anything else that I do. And it takes a lot of time and effort to do that. I'm sure I'd have more money if I didn't have kids. But I definitely would.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't be as happy, right? So,
but this is interesting, because it was a question I had later on. But looking at work-life balance in terms of how important it is being a parent, and being a father, because I totally agree. I come from a single-parent home. And I know the impact that's had on me, but I was very blessed in that I had good men around me that set an example, but also, leaving my home country to come here and then meeting the right people at the right time, who are all passionate fathers, which is so interesting because, even we're going out to lunch with, his primary thing, I think, on his LinkedIn is father of.
Yes, that's right.
Before, being a businessman, being any of these things.
It genuinely is first.
It is first.
Yeah.
How do you find that quite a hard tension to balance? When you say work-life balance, what does that mean? Because there are seasons where it's crazy, hectic.
Oh,
with,
absolutely. And especially if I'm not involved in student, for example, but I know how hard some student landlords have to work in the very tiny windows that they have in between tenancies, although that might be changing with renters' rights and all the rest of it, which is another topic we might get onto. But I think the whole thing, you can probably tell from what I just said, it made a big impression on me where people do and don't have role models. And there is that fairly simplistic point. I went on a business retreat nearly 10 years ago now, and I had been very training skeptical, let's call it. Never done anything, never signed up for anything. I'd been to things like super conferences and whiz-bang NLP shows and things like that. And luckily, the way that I'm wired, I was kind of like, why are these people running to the back of the room? And I'm quite an observer of human behavior, right?
Yeah.
So I was watching all that stuff and thinking, this is what's going on. And then because of the way my mathematical mind works, I was looking and thinking, well, I know what they're charging, and I was counting up what people were spending, and I was like, well, I can see why the guys at the front of the stage are doing it, because they've just taken 150 grand in sales. But why are the people? What's with this sort of sheep mentality? And back then, I didn't really realise they would have shills in the audience who would run first, and they would have all these other little bits of trickery that would go on. But that put a bad taste in my mouth. And before we came on camera, we were talking about having helped people who've been in trouble. It's quite common that people would reach out to people like myself or you who've got a profile when they're in trouble. Unfortunately, it's usually too late. And we were talking about as well, when you bother to sort of take that on board. You've got your own problems you've got to solve on a daily basis, obviously, and then they don't listen to you. And you just think, why did I bother putting the time and effort into that? I've told you what to do, and you just haven't done it. So I had certainly going back a decade or so, I thought everybody who was involved in property education was basically an incarnation of Lucifer. There weren't any good people doing it. And it was all nonsense, 100% wall-to-wall nonsense. And that was obviously too far, but I was polluted by the messages because I went to training with XYZ property or touch-up education or whatever, and they've told me to do this, and it's not, and I'm now 100 grand in debt. I've lost 200 grand on this deal. And I was like, this is awful. But of course, I was also seeing the edge cases where they had fallen out of bed. There's two sides to all of those stories as well, of course, right? And ultimately, if you've paid for education and put your own money or your family's money at risk, you're ultimately accountable for that, right? So I was too far to one side of the fence, and I went and then I met someone, and they made an impression on me. So they were quite strong on the professorial economics, that kind of things front, and they were partnering with someone else who was a serious doer, had a sizable portfolio. Far bigger than mine at the time, and they were doing a retreat, a week in Marbella, and I thought, well, what's the worst that can happen? But in seriousness, I thought, well, do you know what? What the worst that is going to happen is I'm going to get away. So at the time, I was just at the cusp of looking at agencies and should I buy one? Should I start one? I'm spending too much time on property management myself, and that is I don't enjoy that, and it's stopping me from doing deals. So both of those things are not right. So I knew I was at a fairly pivotal sort of point in my property career, if you like. And so I thought, right, well, the worst that can happen is I'm going to go away. I'm going to get away from all the stuff for a week. I'm going to have to. I'm going to leave it with the people in the office, let them run with the football a bit. If they drop the ball, we'll fix it. Don't worry. And I'm going to focus solely on my property businesses because I've always had other things going on as well, I'm going to focus solely on my property businesses, even if this retreat's rubbish, And it wasn't rubbish. It was great. There were some great people there, and I'd underestimated the power of that network. And that's what I say to people these days when they say to me, oh, which one of the, education houses did you go through? And I'm like, my own one, right? Because I couldn't identify with any of them. But don't worry about me, right? Most people are already paid when we're having this conversation, right? Don't worry about me, right? Yeah. You've got a network there. Whatever else happens, that network will be really powerful. I know people who did various mastermind courses or whatever 10 years ago, who's still with that network, meet up once every 3 months, 6 months, talk to people on a daily basis, are business partners with those people. That network was worth the money on its own. Forget the education. Now, sometimes, unfortunately, some of the education standards are still at the level where they're probably worth negative amounts of money because they're more likely to make you lose money than to make money. And that is a problem. And I don't like that, which is why I do the tiny, teeny little bit that I do on that front. But I stick at a level where you've already been through the sludge and the hard yards, to get to there. So I went on this retreat anyway. It's a long answer. Sorry. I went on this retreat, and one of the things that I really, really made a massive impression on me was that the female lead on this retreat, she really understood what her values were. She had a very clear picture of it. And I'd never done any exercises like that. I was sort of loosely aware of that. I'm quite keen on personal development and things like that. But also the professor in me, or the pseudo-professor, I should say, is very aware of pseudoscience and things that sound good but are not real, and neurolinguistic programming and all that sort of stuff. So there's a fine line, isn't there? And so being too skeptical is bad, and I certainly came from a place where I was too skeptical. But the whole values thing really fascinated me. And I went, and actually it was quite a powerful feeling because after we'd been on this retreat, I had this kind of time of feeling very, very, very lonely because I didn't have a peer at the time I could talk to or look up to, or I didn't have a mentor. Couldn't really find the right sort of person. I did then work with a couple of mentors on the back of that, and I'm glad that I did. Although those experiences weren't by no means perfect, they were really good. And I went through my own exercise of finding out what my values were, and the hardest bit of that conversation, very, very hard. Luckily, my wife never listens to this stuff, so I can talk with relative safety, hopefully.
Yeah.
Sorry, Joe, if you're
I'll
out
make
there,
sure I tag her in.
Yeah.
Just to help your cause.
She still won't listen. It's fine. She still won't
yeah.
listen. But I had to go through this exercise of working out what my values were. And the reality the reality of working on your values is that your values come out in what you spend your day to day, week to week, month to month life doing. It's not the honesty, integrity, transparency, blah blah blah. If that's not true, if you're a killing machine, if you're a trader, right, and you're not that guy or that girl, you're not, right? So don't pretend that you are. So I looked and I came up with my own value, which is a very Adam Lawrence way to approach things. At the top that I worked out, and it was winning, right? And that not really a positive, because you could almost say win at all costs. And it didn't really matter what the game was. So if the game was a tiddlywinks against a small child, I would still crush them into the dust, right? If the game was build a big portfolio. So it has its pluses and its minuses. And then my second highest value was family. And I didn't like that, right? I didn't like that. And I looked at myself in the mirror and I spent months and months and months going on this soul-searching journey, talking through with my wife about it, some really difficult conversations. But ultimately, what it boiled down to is you've got to do things differently. So at the time, I've got 3 kids. At the time, I had 2 kids. I needed to be different. I gave up a couple of things I was doing. One of them was I helped to save a local sports club from bankruptcy. It wasn't hard to do that. It was hard to do the things people didn't want to do. People had to be fired. Stuff had to be changed. Prices had to go up. Everybody hated me. I didn't get paid a penny for that. I didn't do it to enrich myself in any way. In fact, I made myself poor. I put my own money into things and things like that, let alone the time. And universally, the whole club hated me after I'd done that. So I thought, well, why are you still here? Out of some bizarre sense of loyalty, leave. So I did. That made sense. And also, we used to have a box at Birmingham City Football Club. So you couldn't really call me a football fan, but I like Birmingham City. But actually, these days, you can't joke anymore because they're getting half decent again. Yeah. But we used to have a box there, and we used to go like friends on a weekly basis, or on a 2 weekly basis when we were at home anyway. And I gave that up because I thought, right, that's taking too much weekend time, taking stuff out of family time. If you want to be the person that you want to see back in the mirror looking at you, you've got to make some changes. So, and don't get me wrong, my wife was the one giving me 80% of this advice. I was just listening to it and nodding, but I was like, yeah, of course. Yeah. But you don't necessarily see everything with clarity when you've got to, even if you're reasonably self-aware, you don't necessarily see everything you need to. So made those changes. Pleased to say I can now very comfortably say family is my absolute number one value. And my kids are at much more exciting ages now, so they do stuff. They do some cool stuff.
How old are they now?
So 14, 12, and my little girl is nearly 9. Wow. So my one boy is the England under-13 10-pin bowling number 1. So he travels around the country, and even we went to Ireland to bowl in a European tournament this year. Wow. And supporting him to do that is, but what 10-pin bowling is a very niche. It's the highest participation sport in the country, because people can bowl at 85 years of age. And there are still people down at our local bowling alley who do go bowling at 85 years of age, and it's great. But it's competitive-wise, it's very, very niche. Quite big in the US, but very, very small in the UK. But his level of dedication, and I've taught him really simple things like, we said we're going to turn up. We turn up. That's what we did, because and this is the funny thing about the world we live in with AI and this, that, and the other, it's still the basic things that you just do what you said you were going to do. Yeah. You said you're going to do that, do it. Be kind first. Don't be horrible to people. Don't cheat. Don't do this. Don't do that. But do these things. Do be positive. Do turn up. Do encourage others. And it's great to see him. He's applied himself, and he's so far ahead of where I was when I was 12 years old. I find it mind-blowing. And that sort of stuff is very much at my number one. And it takes time. And like you said, I'm pretty time poor sort of character. There's often someone looked at my calendar in the office the other day and they said, how do you do that? There's bits where I'm supposed to be doing 3 things at once, and I'm generally doing them as a rule somehow, because I'm on a Zoom call while I'm typing something on a keyboard, while I'm teaching someone else to do something in the background. So it is, double and triple timing is a powerful skill for people to pick up when they get busier. But yeah, it was a tough thing to do, but I'm so glad that I did it. And from that retreat, whilst that's not necessarily business related, taught me everything, because I think also that has then given me much more why, because the why back then kind of was, well, I can do it, can't I? So why not? If it works, just do it. Why stop? I've never agreed with this kind of like, here's your number. and work to the number, which again is a bit of a guru thing. If you want X £1,000 a month, that's going to give you financial freedom and things like that. And I don't like it because life changes, Dylan, and at certain points in life, you need more money, you need less money. It's a funny thing. You need less money when you retire, then you need more money again if you're going to go into care, if you want to be a master of your own destiny. So it's not clear that for the financial freedom as it's packaged is a real thing. So instead, do what you enjoy, build something that you love, try and make something good, build something with a purpose, bring some good people along with you on the journey. Now that's a way to do it. So that was the catalyst really of a longer, and also the year after I did it, the female lead did say to me, why don't you join as one of the mentors? You're quite experienced. I'd done a bit of mentoring at the business school I was at. I was a mentee, then I was asked to be a mentor. And I thought, well, it gave me a totally new, we often get people who come to one of our property business workshops or something who said, I've never been to anything before, but I just sort of felt maybe I could trust you. And I was like, well, I'm really glad you have. And if you think it's crap, tell me, apart from anything else, and we want to improve. We don't get much of that feedback, to be fair.
No.
But we attract good people because you know what you're getting. There's no fluffing.
There's no fluff.
No.
I think that's the sad part I feel about your message and your persona is that your content, I said this before we came on, you have the best content in the property industry in terms of quality, knowledge, expertise. Out of anyone that I've seen online and I've listened to and read,
let's just say anyone, that's fine.
Anyone, yeah. I got you. No. You can pay me later. But there's something about, that balance where we have great marketing gurus.
Yeah.
On especially the social media age, where the content is this deep, but it's very broad, but it aims at one aspect, which is normally financial freedom.
Yes.
And that's what it's built on. And it's normally what, that classic marketing saying, market people what they want and then give them what they need. But the problem I'm seeing is what they need is with someone like yourself, but you're not into the fluff of marketing.
No.
That I see. It's just you deliver great content. And that's partly what I wanted to get you on as well. Is if we can help get that message out, it'll be great, because this is the kind of stuff that saves people from bankruptcy, saves people from falling for the Lamborghini too soon, lifestyle kind of thing.
Sure.
But I think the values is such a key thing that's missing, because when I look at you and I think, okay, you've got a solid family life, you've intentionally worked at that. I think that's so encouraging, because I always say to people, so many people I know are successful in financial terms, but their relationships are falling apart. Their kids hate them.
Yeah. It's that they've gone too far. That's the balance. That's where the balance comes.
That's where the balance, and that's what I like about what you said. But what's interesting is psychologically, so many psychologists will say your values are your values, and you can't really change them.
Yeah, it's a bit like you can't teach entrepreneurship, and there are bits that are natural in entrepreneurialism, but you definitely can. You can do anything you want. The power of the mind is unfathomable, and we can only understand a small percentage of it. There's so much more to come in terms of neuroscience, in terms of goodness knows what will happen if Elon gets his way and he's implanting chips into people's brains. You know what I mean? But there's so much you can. It's like the old. There's half a guru saying that I really agree with. It's the old, if you believe you can or believe you can't, you'll be right. That's the saying.
Yeah.
Well, if you believe you can jump off a cliff and survive, you won't be right. You're going to die, right? So, but if you believe you can't, you'll definitely be right, because you've stopped yourself before you start. So you absolutely can. And look, your values do change. One of the things I learned, your values do change over time anyway. What was important to me when I was, under 25, living a pretty hedonistic lifestyle as a typical, young man with not fully developed prefrontal cortex and wasting my talent left, right, and centre, generally speaking, but having a good time, going out drinking. We won't dwell on the rest of it, right? But that was I'm the same person that I am today. My values were different, and part of it, apart from anything else, was just not being that considerate to the people around me, or just not putting that much thought into the people around me. And I have built a machine that needs the people around it, and the good people. It's so wholesome and it's so pleasing. And what I can give to people is stable employment, leadership, guidance. What I need them to do for me is the day-to-day stuff that doesn't interest me in any way, because I haven't got the attention span for it apart from anything else. But there can be a two-way street there, and it can be a really positive experience. At the moment we're hearing mega negativity around employing people because of the new Employment Rights Act and things like that. And there's a reason. Risk goes up, things change. Same in property at the moment. Renters' Rights Act comes in. You don't think there's going to be major changes. You're not at the races, right? There's major changes. But that boils down to change the risk, change the profile. People want to change the returns, or they change their behavior and they get out, right? They change doing things, or they don't employ people in terms of. But when and I've certainly listened to people who've employed thousands and tens of thousands of people. Would that I ever get there one day? But they see the enriching side of that. If you've got good people who understand how the deal works and enjoy the deal, and they want to be there. You don't really want an organization full of people who are so ambitious they'll stab everybody in the back, right? Because who's going to make the tea apart from anything else? Because nobody cares about the tea. They might make their own tea and nobody else's tea. That's not a culture that you want to be involved in. Some people who are going to just say, right, this is what I do. I want to come to work at this time. I want to be comfortable while I'm at work. I want to be respected. And then I want to leave work at this time. That's fine. That's good. I kind of work on more flexible basis, and I'm a bit of an early riser as well, so that gives me a bit of an edge in terms of the volume of stuff.
What time are you up in the morning?
4:30ish, and still early at the weekends as well. I don't know how people do body clock changes at the week. Mine doesn't work like that.
No.
5 o'clock if I'm very, very late. I think I got about 5:15 this morning, but I was quite late to bed, so that was probably why. And I knew I knew what I was doing this morning, so it was quite well planned out.
Yeah.
No,
that's incredible. But with just going back a bit with your story, so you finished school, so you grew up in a kind of really just normal family, good, but just working class, nothing spectacular. But you had scholarships to all this private education and that.
Yeah.
Then you went into Oxford straight after school. How was that as an experience? Because, and also what I'd like to hear from you is, what would your advice be to younger people where, especially in this kind of world, a lot of people knock traditional education. So what would be your comments now, and myself included? Like, I've got 3 young girls. I'm like, what do I do? They're very young now, but what am I going to encourage them to do? And what would your advice be?
I ask myself this for my own children, because I think some of that goes back to what you were saying about the marketing gurus and things like that. And it's kind of like, well, you can spend whatever you spend these days on a uni degree, 30 grand plus living costs on the most basic of uni degrees, or you spend 25 grand on my program and it's equivalent. It's like, it's really not equivalent. It's not equivalent. Well, what we've built in when we've done our workshops is try and deliver like a master's level of information. So we're expecting people to be at a graduate level, not in they've been to university doing it, but I mean in their property businesses, they've done an undergraduate, or they're in the middle of an undergraduate, and they need to taste what we think is the next level that they need. So I think probably about half the people that go to university shouldn't, because the university structure has crept and turned into a little bit of a scam at the bottom end, really, in degrees that don't have that much value. But I think for vocational stuff, because if you can do something that's vocationally you're passionate about, it's magnificent. Some of the happiest people I've ever met have been teachers and nurses, right? Also, some of the most miserable people I've met. But then they need to do something else.
Absolutely.
That's the difficult truth of that, or they need to change themselves if they don't like what there is. But either way, it's going to be tough. And that was probably Tony Blair, certainly up there with his top 3 biggest mistakes. The idea that 75% of people were going to go to university was just silly. It's not supposed to be an elitist thing, and it shouldn't be. But the whole system, because we operate a semi-communist system, really, in terms of the fee is the fee, and you can go to, I don't want to malign any particular university or upset anybody, but you can go to Oxford, or you can go to not Oxford, that it was a former, the worst ranked university in the UK, and you'll pay the same amount of money. That's not a market, obviously. And the market only encourages, apart from else, largely speaking, bringing in students from overseas. And then that brings in a whole confusion over migration, apart from anything else, which at the moment is a complete tinderbox. Whereas actually, generally speaking, the people that come over, certainly I've only have internal experience of the top universities in the country, unfortunately, much as it's sad to say that. But the people who come over are come from fairly wealthy backgrounds, are certainly very well educated, very well brought up, and they bring money into the UK. So I mean, you want those guys and girls. Believe me, you absolutely want them. And lots of them that left, especially at Warwick. I had a cohort of 71 people on our full-time Masters in Business Administration. 68 were from outside the UK.
Wow.
And 56, I think it was, were from outside the EU. So it was, you don't want those people leave. They wanted to stay. They're going to buy or rent flats in London or wherever. They're going to work for McKinsey. They're going to do all this stuff. They're going to pay a lot of tax. And they're bringing assets over in the first place. But look, economics around immigration is something I could talk about for quite a while because it fascinates me apart from anything else. But I think you need to be careful. I think what you don't want to do is start from the premise that everyone's got to go to university, otherwise they're a failure. Terrible idea. And if anything needs to get you over the line in that thinking, there is danger to jobs due to AI. I'm in the bullish camp of AI will create more than it destroys. But I don't know about the timing. I'm very unsure on the timing. And there could be a lot of white-collar jobs destroyed before the real growth starts to kick in. If you're good with your hands, if you want to be a tradesperson, we're somewhere between 25 and 50,000 bricklayers short of the number of houses this government supposedly wants to build. Whenever the next election comes around, not having a go at the Labour Party, because they all said 1.5 million or more, they'll say the same thing again, because they say, well, we'll do it right this time, Well, they still need 400,000 people in construction short. We know we're 1 million plus people in healthcare short, just because the aging, there are certainties in here. It's just time. The population is aging, and we're going to need a lot more care. And we're not ready for the Japanese care robots or whatever yet. And I'm not sure that we ever will be as a culture, to be honest with you. So there's stuff out there for people to work towards. And look, one of the things that drives me mad about data that I go on about on occasion on my soapbox is when they start comparing 25-year-olds of today to 25-year-olds from 30 years ago. And they say, well, they can't get a house. They can't do this. They can't do that. It's like, at the moment, 51% of them are going to university. Back then, 15% of them were going to university. You've taken 3 years of their career off them, is one way of looking at that, right? So today's 25-year-old, really, it should be a 28-year-old today compared to a 25-year-old from years ago to make a fair comparison, right? People retire later. All this stuff that goes on, whereas lots of people left school at 16. All right, not going back 30 years, but certainly going back 50 years. Lots of people left school at 16. But if you're not carrying that debt burden around with you, that's also potentially helpful. So if you're not going to get, I'm not saying don't do degrees. They add value. All the data shows you that they add value if they're the right sort of degree, right? Also, student loans are going to follow us around for longer and longer in life as everybody gets older. So we need to be, and soon the minimum wage full-time will be enough for you to start paying back your student loan. And I know from, I was recruiting the last remotely corporate job I had. I was asked to recruit a team at one point, and the way to start was internally. And I was utterly stunned at the fact that a lot of people were coming from the call center, right? And they had master's degrees. This was in the wake of 2008, right? So they couldn't get they were working for a good employer. They'd done a smart thing, really. They were young. They got their foot in the door with a good employer. Yeah, they didn't want to work in the call center. Sure thing. But it was the foot in the door. And there was just so much talent to choose from to recruit this team. I was like, goodness, good job. I'm not going externally. I really, really don't need to. So you also get into this level, don't you, where you need to stand out. So the master's becomes nearly obligatory if you're going to do the undergrad. Unless the undergrad is particularly vocational, the master's becomes obligatory. What then? Then the PhD maybe becomes interesting. That's tougher because that's years long. I don't know how that works these days with deep research and things like that. Because you don't need 4 years anymore. I don't reckon. You probably get one done in about 4 months these days. I reckon. But of course, you need to break ground. But I mean, the amount of that that's filtering through into academia is pretty incredible, to be honest. So I think you've got to just not have fixed ideas that you must do this to be successful. You must do that to be successful. If I look around the field of business and property. But businesses beyond property, people that I'm connected with, very, very few of them went even to a red brick university. Very, very few. Some of them went through incredible hardship, and that forged them into steely kind of characters. I wouldn't recommend that for your girls or my children or anything like that. But it does happen. Pressure makes diamonds. It also has a big drop-off factor. So you don't really want these kind of, I think this is why do you give children guardrails and guidance, right? I tried to accept. It was hard for me to get my head around when they were first born, but as they started to grow up, it's like they're not going to do what I say. They're not going to do what I say. In fact, I'm going to need to be quite clever about. There's reverse psychology.
It's
kind of works for a while, right? But you can only guide them, because if you think you can control them, as soon as they're out your sight, some of those kids that I've known, kids and adults over the years, who've had the most guardrails put around them, are the biggest rebels of them all and the naughtiest so it doesn't work like that. You've got to impart the best values that you can into them, and they're going to run their own way, and you've got to hope that they can be self-aware and all the rest of it. So look, I said earlier on, people skills and doing what you said you were going to do and being honest and knowing when to turn up, right? And being the person who, put it this way, I was recruiting for a job about 2 years ago, and there was hundreds of applicants, and the applicants weren't very good, mostly, right? Some of them were good, but one person knocked on the office door. So they've had to Google me or the office or whatever, find out where we are, knocked on the office door, didn't live around the corner. Okay, they were 20 minutes away, but there's effort involved. Handed their CV in person. Guess what? Person got recruited. Guess what? Still there. Really good.
Wow.
So one thing, right? Don't even know if they went to university. Do you know what? I didn't care.
Yeah.
I didn't care. So it depends what you're doing, doesn't it? If you're involved at the sharp end of tech, you're probably going to need a degree. Material sciences, cool stuff like that. There's doing some amazing stuff with AI in general. AI, not so much, because you could be a great coder, because coding skills now don't involve learning Python or whatever. You know, it involves asking the right questions and being inquisitive and all this vibe coding stuff and stuff like that. So I think you'd be better off to instill good inquisitive values in them. And if it's right for them to go to university, if they're academic, absolutely encourage them to do so, support them in doing so. And I'm sure, like we will, financially support them so they don't come out with a big noose around their neck. But one of the things I heard from a financial advisor that I've used a couple of years ago that made a really good impression on me was there is no point. You know, the average age of an inheritance in the UK is 62, right? And the reality is by 62, it's too late, because your life has played out a good slug of its path. And whatever happens at that stage is probably not going to change your life materially. Whereas instead, if 1/10 of that inheritance had come to you at 25, especially if you used it as a house deposit or something like that, huge difference, huge difference. So that's one of the reasons why I think there's lots of things I think, as you know, but I think we should do more encouraging equity release in the generations above that have got money to get money, mitigate inheritance tax, give children a start. Huge weapon of latent equity that sits there not doing anything frustrates the hell out of me. And I think with the government, if I was in government, I'd get told off for this because it'd probably be overreach. But I would be nudging people to say, take some equity release, because it brings the money into the economy, it moves things forward, it's first-time buyers on the ladder, it helps social construction.
And I mean, in line with that, what would you say in terms of raising your kids and helping them, but not doing everything for them, if you know what I mean, in terms of that drive, that person knocking on the door, driving 20 minutes, you know, because I've been talking to my wife about this recently a lot, saying, well, these girls are going to have every opportunity that we didn't have, but we don't want them to be entitled. So we want to show them hard work, and also this modern day parenting thing where everyone's a winner. You know, everyone gets a participation prize. I'm like, what are we doing? You know, there's something.
Is it like a bell we have to ring if I'm going to go on a mad rant or anything like that?
Yeah.
That stuff.
We should get one.
That stuff's so psychologically damaging. It's so psychologically damaging because at some point you come up against the big wider world of, you know, we don't live day to day at work in a democracy, do we? We live in a meritocracy. And don't get me wrong, some people get lucky. There's nepotism. There's this, that, the other. Of course there is, right? But generally speaking, you kind of get to the level that you want to, or there's the old Peter principle, you get promoted above your level of competence, right? Because it's a funny thing that gets you to be successful in a work environment, right? But what do you want them to do? Come to work one day after the fluffiest university where everything is so well, no one's allowed to offend you. The comedians have to be nerfed because they might offend your sensibilities. And then bang, Bruce, who's worked there for 13 years, he's just a bit of a nasty boy, to be honest with you. He's not going to be nice to you. He's not going to care about you. He's going to get you to do what you want to do, and you're going to think, oh, where's this all come from? And it's going to hit you like a ton of bricks suddenly. So don't buy stuff that they break. That's one of the rules that I have, right?
Yeah.
Respect that stuff. Doesn't matter what it cost or didn't cost. Doesn't matter what money we do or don't have, right? You broke it, you don't get another one. And I think that's a key thing. Medals for turning up. I would just get my children out of those schools. I honestly would. I think it's so damaging. It's just not the real world. Or I'd certainly teach them that, that's not how it works in life. It's not how it works. Not that everything's completely fair. Life isn't fair. It absolutely isn't. But you can put yourself in much stronger positions than that. So I really worry about the psychology of some of that and this business of us not resilience is built when you go to the gym, right? What's the point? You break down your muscles to build better muscles. You push your VO2 max to get more capacity, right? That's the cornerstones of, cardiovascular or weight training, right? And no one really, I don't think anybody argues with that as a general rule. You do get the old gurus who tell you get a massage gun you can buy for £100 and you can massage your stomach and give you a six pack, but we all know they kind of don't work, right? Really, because you've got to do the work in order to get that done. Well, human beings are the same. Your mind is exactly the same as your body. If there's no mental gym, if there's no reps, if there's no turning up, if you're not trying to get better, it won't happen for you. And it's unfortunate because I don't mean kick everyone in the bottom end of the swimming pool and see who drowns and full Darwinism or whatever. Nothing like that. There needs to be a pathway to it. But I see look, I'm lucky enough, my children are privately educated. I'm proud to say it. It was something I absolutely wanted to do for them, even though when they were born, couldn't afford it. But it was a big motivator for me. It's driven me a long, long way. And what they talk about at school are things like growth mindsets and resilience. And I think, wish we'd spoken about that. We were talking about the Roman Empire and Henry VIII or something like that. I wish we'd been talking about growth mindsets and resilience. And they tend to do the best stuff, have access to the best research and things like that, and have the teachers who believe in that stuff. So there's certainly no medals for turning up. No, I don't think there ever will be.
And I think that the deception of it is that it looks like it's been, the soft kind of parenting model. It looks like you're being compassionate or loving. Because I've spoken to parents about this and, discipline in homes and all these things. It's been completely lost.
Yes.
I thought we are raising a chaotic generation because we're trying to be liked by our kids.
Yeah, and then we try and find, and then we try and label everything to say to find a label for. And I'm really very, very much against all of that stuff. But I think it's not that it makes it sound like in my household they just get up and do 100 press ups in the morning and then they eat gruel or something like that, which is
actually 200, isn't it?
100 at night as well. That's how we get to the 200. But it's not like that at all. But they love first, right? They know there's unconditional love, absolutely. But one of the things that I've understood with more clarity over recent years, one of them is I have to credit Rod Turner for this actually, because he's very good with structure. And I'm very creative, right? I don't like structure that much. I'd rather just sort of go off and do whatever interests me. Yeah. But I learned how good structure is for me, and then embracing so one of the things I think that, again, go back to the guru sales dream. Here comes your $3,000 a month. There's been a bit of inflation, so maybe it's $4,000 a month these days. Here's your $10,000 a month. That's your big goal. And then you're kind of done. One of the phrases I really dislike is this idea of do what other people won't for a few years so you can spend the rest of your life doing what other people can't. It's like, don't work like that being an entrepreneur, pal. It does not work like that. Prepare yourself for the squiggly line. We've all seen the squiggly line. That ends up at the end, but it's a roller coaster of a ride, yeah? So I have learned to embrace structures that are good for me. I need certain structures. So when you're sold the dream of sack your boss, blah, 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 it's all going to be great and all the rest of it. One of the things that certain personality types who I think get attracted into the property industry do is they lose all their structures around them, and they haven't got that structure, and that can be really damaging because then they end up with, well, what does a work day even look like? And what you should be able to do, what I'm able to do is say, well, it certainly doesn't look like 9 to 5, not because I've got to work from 5 a.m. to 10 p.m., but because I can go to this carol service or I can go to this kids thing or whatever, because I can make up for it somewhere else and I can shuffle things around. But have the structure whereby if I need to do some focus work, there's a block for it. I approach it with certain methodologies. I'm going to do half an hour of work, take a 2-minute break, have a walk, get back in the seat, factor in your 10,000 steps a day into things like that and all of that sort of stuff. And look, I'm not perfect at that every day, Dylan. I don't think if anybody is and listening to this, then well done. You're a better person than me. But those structures are a positive thing on my life. So embrace the structures, pick the structures that are modularly helpful. Don't just go, oh, I don't have a boss anymore, so I don't have to do the bits I don't like. Bad news. That's not how life works. Right.
It actually gets worse, I think, initially in the short term.
I agree.
Because when you're starting out, I remember because we were starting at the time, so the property business, and we were starting a church at the same time.
Right,
so we were in both kind of phases. I remember sitting at home because I was working from home and I thought, what do I do? You just have that moment where you have...
How do I prioritize?
What should I be doing here? And I'm sitting there and I, at that stage, thought 3 properties a year was incredible. If I was going to buy 3 houses, that would be amazing. And then I quickly realized, oh my goodness, I'd been sold that financial freedom figure. I thought, okay, 10 grand a month, get there, boom. But then when you hit a figure, when your goal is something like that, what I found is almost a crisis of meaning.
This is the Olympic gold medal syndrome, right? I don't know if you've heard of it framed like that before, but there's a very, very famous piece of work that basically there's a huge incidence of depression in Olympic athletes when they hit the gold, because the problem is what's next. And one of the things I learned about goals early on, the biggest failure I ever had when it came to goals was one year, and I luckily snapped it off pretty early, but early October I'd hit my goals. So first job, pat myself on the back, put my feet up. And then I got bored really quickly, which I kind of always knew. But I didn't know what to do. Now, of course, it's really easy. What I should have done is reset my goals, right? And what I should have done is had the conversation with myself that I have with people these days that says, you usually fit into one of 2 camps. You either want a stretch goal, and if you don't make it, but you get somewhere, you get 85% of the way there, you're still really pleased and you'll still have had a good year. Or you'll get really, really down if you don't hit that target. So you need a more realistic, smart goal. But when you get there or you're getting close, you must reset your goal. So I really dislike arbitrary time constraints. So for example, we had a pretty good year in 2019, an exceptional year in 2020, which we really had no right to do, really, when you think about it. And 2021 was quite tough. Now there was 2 deals that we completed on the 19th and the 22nd of December in 2020, where if they'd rolled on into the 5th of January 2021, 2020 would have been disappointing and 2021 would have been amazing. So there's no point me saying that because it's an arbitrary, in terms of work days, there was about 3 working days different. When we completed on the 22nd, I already had to upset the solicitors to get them to work right before Christmas because everyone had broken up, sort of thing. So be careful with arbitrary time constraints, but they are useful for, apart from that, looking backwards.
Absolutely.
But one of the things that people need to think is, if you don't think you've had a great year, if you're listening to this around sort of January time or whatever, last year wasn't that great, I'd encourage you, think back 5 years, think back 10 years. What's happened? Probably immeasurable change. And you'd be so pleased if those had been your targets. So don't get stuck in the world of you must have this next. Now look, daily goals are useful, right? Because you have a little list of them, tick them off. It's still a good thing, I think, to do it on pen and paper, because there's a psychological, triumph. Exactly. I've done it. You don't need to put down, write War and Peace on your list. It might just be that payment needs making, and I've forgotten to do it a couple of times. I've got to do it tomorrow. Done. Great. Happy. Next job, So it doesn't need to be big stuff, but it's the old how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time.
Yeah.
But there's a big, broad spectrum of that stuff. And remember the Olympic gold medalist syndrome, because you've got to think about what the next goal is. And some of that comes a little bit back to where your values are. I mean, imagine you're an Olympic gold medalist. He or she has probably trained for around about thick end of 20 years, certainly over a decade, to get to that gold medal, right? So what does it mean? What has life meant up until then? What can you now do? Because let me reframe it for you. You might then be able to go on and become a motivational speaker who could touch hundreds of thousands of lives and enrich people. You might be able to be someone who can consult for schools and educational environments for what good sporting programs and disciplines look like. It might be that actually you've always really enjoyed working with kids and you can go be a sports teacher. None of those are a failure. No,
Absolutely.
They're just different from where you were before. But having that clarity, this is a bit like the old, when a professional footballer, 60, 70% of them are bankrupt within 3 years of giving football up because they don't know how to move forward from, and also they're young. These people are primarily in their 20s. It's quite difficult to know what to do with such clarity, and that's why you need good people around you. And to be fair, these days, I think football clubs are pressured into it more than anything, but they do spend more money on trying to keep people on the straight and narrow, because it's not a good look if they were getting paid 150 grand a week and now they're bankrupt, or they're a gambling addict, or they're all of those other things. Yeah. So it does, and that is changing, not just because they get paid so much money, but because they are putting more resources into it. But it's so important. And this is the thing, you're never bulletproof. I've learned this and this is why I don't like the 3 grand a month, 10 grand a month, whatever the numbers are that are thrown out there these days. I don't like it because things change, inflation comes, and we've learned that over the last few years, right? I've written a lot of stuff about inflation, as you know. I'm obsessed with the stuff, right? But that changes. Your needs in life change. Maybe you have a medical event. Maybe you have this. Maybe you have that. I've been 2 or 3 times, felt absolutely financially untouchably bulletproof, and then something's hit me in the face, and I haven't been. So part of that also is at least convincing yourself that's still the case, retaining some of that hunger that I think we both share from completely different upbringings, but seeing that hunger and remembering, and that's why people say, stay humble, stay hungry. Good.
Absolutely.
Good advice.
And I think it's so difficult for people to understand that, because when you're on that journey, I was saying this to a friend recently, because I definitely hit like a slight, I don't use a depression because I've not been really depressed, but definitely a down.
I mean, that's a clinical thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And like you, I've been in a similar boat, not clinical, but definitely felt
a
lows, absolutely.
Yeah, and I'd like to ask you about that, because I think the myth is, because definitely when I do counseling with people and that, because I have that on the church side, is I see, when people are suicidal or something like that, they've hit those goals and they're questioning why, what is the purpose behind carrying on in life, doing things. At least when you're poor and you're on the journey to wealth, you think when you get it, you'll be happy or you'll be content or all these things. What I found is nothing actually really changes.
No.
And beyond like your needs being met and stuff, you go on the holidays, all of that stuff, you're still the same person.
It's an
same
absence
thing.
of a problem. It's not the presence of something wonderful. That's what it boils down to. Because if you see, and I see, I'm probably closer to real life, certainly than your average politician, I think, but than most people who maybe would have a balance sheet like mine or a net worth like mine or whatever, because very deliberately, from a commercial perspective, the strategy for us has been secondary locations, secondary market, strongly yielding properties so that we would always have cash flow, right? And the reality of that is the average job is not where the average job in the country is, and the average tenant doesn't move country, let alone town, and even street, right? So this is what real life is like at that part of, whether it's the house prices, whether it's the lack of jobs, whether there's a number of different things it could be, right? But you see and you hear their mentality day in, day out, and also understand a bit about their circumstances if you've got a bit of compassion about that. And someone said to me the other day, they said, well, what would you do if your tenants wanted to buy the property there? And I was like, I've sold maybe a dozen of the 100+ sales that I've done, right, have been to tenants. And they're the best 12 I've ever done. I really love it. I feel great about it. We took a property, probably, that one day was pretty much derelict, put good tenants in there, they stayed, and now they own it. What would I not like about that? And have they had a little discount? Yeah, 5% or something, gets them started with giving away money. Well, no, I'm not, because if that property became empty, and I put it on the market, and I paid an agent, and I did all those things, that 5%'s gone anyway. I haven't lost anything. And I've gained a feeling of something with some purpose, which I'm pleased about. So
and you've had rent to the point of sale.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no void. Absolutely right.
The void period.
And when you're dealing with cheaper stock like I do, it doesn't. 5% is not a huge amount of money. It might be 6-7 grand. Double council tax, utility. It doesn't take long for that stuff to be sucked up. So I'm actually not losing anything commercially, but it's not a commercial point. It's a point of, I'll sell them all tomorrow. If tenants are listening and they want to buy something they own in mind, 5% off, no problem. Let's get it done.
Yeah,
let's get it done. I'll buy some more. Don't get me wrong. I'm not giving up.
But Adam, I thought landlords were evil and we were just greedy people. So you're really messing up the mainstream narrative here. You're going to get us cancelled for this. So,
I've always wanted to be cancelled, actually, Dylan. So if it was going to go today, then I'm pleased to be cancelled alongside you. Thank you for the opportunity.
But I listened to you talk about this recently. I was listening to a bunch of podcasts leading up to this. And you made a very valid point where someone asked a question about institutional investors coming in, taking the market, and where they say, oh, well, how can a private landlord own so many houses and that? But you said the houses you're doing up and taking is actually solving a problem that the institutional investors won't touch. Can you just explain that a bit and expand on that? Because I think that's a very important narrative we need to change in this industry.
So, and I've been on my own voyage with this because let's talk real numbers and talk about, let's do a very quick last 50 years, right? 1980s, right to buy, not replacing those social homes. Wealth transfer from the state, so from every taxpayer, to people who are worse off, under a conservative government. Who would have thought that, right? Incredibly redistributive tactics. The rider, probably because it was a conservative government, no rebuilding of those, or limited rebuilding of that stock. The problem, well, that's a generational one hit for people in the 80s did their best out of it. My dad's parents bought their house under right to buy, worked out their 5 years, sold it, and I remember they gave my dad £1,000, which at the time I thought was £1 million realistically, and went to live in a ward and control place. But it got them from genuine working class. My grandfather on my dad's side was disabled, had his leg blown off in World War II. So obviously struggled to work, especially in the days where there wasn't as much any knowledge work to do of any kind, really, to speak of. So that changed their life, realistically, and changed a lot of people's lives. Changed Angela Rayner's life, as it goes, interestingly enough. So to keep it apolitical. So fast forward, early, Housing Act 1988, tenancies moved away from Rising Damp and Rigsby and whatever else, moving towards the AST. The age of the AST is ending, as we know, but we've had that period from I can see the gravestone in my mind, 1988 to 2026. There's the AST. Obviously, people came into the market, massive credit expansion, massive credit expansion, and then also more and more buy-to-let properties. This is a nuance that usually gets missed out of this narrative because I try and be objective. I appreciate I'm an asset owner, I'm a landlord, whatever, but I try and be objective. A lot of houses became rentals post-2008 that people couldn't sell. So the PRS carried on growing and growing and growing and growing. Between 2002 and 2013, it did take a lot of units away from first-time buyers, right? And I've had to get my head around that because I don't believe I've ever taken a unit away from a first-time buyer, and I've net sold. I have put units in without building them. I've put them into the system because they've been derelict and they've been all these things, right? And then, like I said, I've sold some to tenants. I've sold some on the open market to make our books balance a little bit. And now we live in an age of much higher interest rates apart from anything else. So this huge, I think we went from 2.2 million to 5.5 million homes in the PRS within about 13 or 14 years. If you look at the graph of the first time buyers next to that, they suffer for that. So that did happen. That's a thing. Then 2015, George Osborne, budget, the war on landlords started and it's not let up yet. And it doesn't look like a political thing. There's been chips and chips and chips in the armour, of which the Renters' Rights Act is another one. And all the way through, various people have said, that's enough for me. I did a post the other day that absolutely took off on Facebook about 11% of tenants have been served a Section 21 notice within their current tenancy. Now, this was a survey from the evil global multinational that is the Co-op. So I think it's probably fair to say they don't have much of an agenda in that survey. And some people just lost their mind with me, like they do on Facebook. They lost their mind. This is ridiculous. Now, other people were commenting saying, I think this will be higher. Yeah. And then the sensible people commenting, the level-headed people were saying, wait till after Christmas. Because, again, against that mainstream narrative, landlords don't want to serve eviction notices in November, December. They're waiting until January. And then it will go up and up and up and up and up again. And then some people try to say, well, only 30,000 went to court, so this can't be right. And it's like, I don't know if you understand the process of serving a notice to getting to court. The only time it has to get to court is if really in the real world, because the local authority have made it go to court. This is the most perverse thing about the 21.
The social housing.
Most people start looking decide. It's done by negotiation. It's not a hostile thing necessarily. And the amount of tenants, you must see the amount of tenants we certainly see these days who are, why are you moving? Landlord's selling up. Been in place for 8 years. Landlord's selling up. Landlord's selling up. And the amount of people who commented on this post sharing their experience, I've got and they're all 1, 2, and 3 property landlords. 85% of the landlords in the UK in that, and 50 odd % of the units are held by those people. And this transition to institutions, there's no thought given, and there really is at governmental level, to what transition looks like. What they can see, I believe, is when BlackRock, if you want to pick on them, or whoever, big institutions own massive portfolios. Lloyds have made headlines, haven't they? Citra Living, their arm, 7,500 units they've got now, and they want to have 50,000 units by 2030. And then these people go, this is ridiculous, this is insane. Like, do you know how many units the biggest housing associations have got? Because they've got a couple of 100,000, 200, 250,000. So Lloyds will still be a bit of a minnow. And this is Lloyds Bank. They've got money, right? But people will come into this market and it will go from 2 or 3% of the PRS at the moment is owned by institutional / pension / whatever money. That's of the rental sector. So bear in mind, that's less than 1% of all the properties in the UK are owned under that structure. If you look at the Netherlands, if you look at America, if you look at Germany, for example, there was a year where Patrizia on their own, a big build-to-rent developer in the UK, apart from anything else, did 10% of all Germany's transactions on their land reg. One organisation, 10% in 1 year, right? So they're more at 15% of the rental units, and they're still growing. And in Germany, there isn't the same level. There isn't the same level of home ownership. Fewer than 50% of people own their homes, whereas we're at 65, right? So it could be worse in other places, but there isn't the same hostility towards renting. Although bear in mind, if you live in Germany, you bring your own kitchen to a rental, which is a strange.
Right.
Yeah, you fit your own kitchen. And the tenancies last 10 years, primarily I'd imagine, because you think, I'm not moving my bloody kitchen out. That's moving the washing machine is bad enough. Who's going to move the kitchen? Yeah. So there is, you can't get away from the broader point that people did pump money into the sector and stuff did get taken away from first-time buyers. But what the mainstream narrative needs to understand is that stopped 10 years ago, soon to be 11 years ago, and the sector's absolutely flatlined since then. And guess what? Population's still growing, right? This isn't about demand side anymore, right? It's been about supply side. And even if the likes of you and I, or I'm knocking on a bit these days, the 20-somethings and the 30-somethings come into the market, form a limited company, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 of them do that. We're enthusiastic. We're going to build a portfolio. There's fewer of them doing that because the maths don't add up like it used to in the days of interest rate normalization. The OPEX with all the compliance and all the ventilation systems and some of the stuff we were talking about earlier, OPEX, the landlord register, the OPEX just goes up and up and up and up. So the rents go up and up and up and up. Build to rent doesn't count because they operate at a level of when a 1-bed flat is £1,000 in a nice part of the UK, right? A build to rent is 1,300 quid. So it's a completely different proposition. You're paying for a lifestyle. You're paying for a concierge. You're paying for all this sort of stuff. And build to rent don't work that well. In a day of risk-free rates of return of 4 to 5.5%, it doesn't work that well anymore. So there are 1.2 million empty homes in England. 1.2 million.
Where are those,
right?
though? Is that all up north or,
So if you look, and there is, I can't remember the name of the organisation. They'd probably love me to because they get a free plug now. But there is someone who pays 20 quid or something like that. You can Google it and find out, to people who submit empty homes to them that they end up going and doing as a transaction. So they've got the people out there as their eyes on the street. But I reckon if we went for a walk around a few streets, we wouldn't struggle to find. Yeah. And bear in mind, that is still, what's that? 3% of the number of or 4% of the number of households in England is empty. It's only 1 in 25. And actually, I think sometimes you don't notice that much. Now look, let me qualify it. 1.2 million, around about 250 to 350,000 of those are going to be your base level of voids in a rental sector of 4.7 million households. There's switchovers, there's turnarounds, there's refurbs. So you need to hold some whip, some stock, right? So let's say that explains 400,000. Shouldn't really be more than that. Then you've got all the probate that's sitting there, and probate, sometimes, especially when people own assets, takes a year or more. Opposite my office, it's in a residential area. There was a property across the road from us that was empty for 18 months. Just very, very desirable bungalow. Not enough bungalows around by me, but probate, 18 months empty. So that sort of stuff happens all the time. I think the popular narrative is to say, it's owned by someone overseas. That's a tiny, tiny fraction. In London, it's much lower. So to an extent, because the properties are worth so much more, things move more quickly and there's more demand and there's more proactive people who will go, I'd like to rent this off you, and there's more money to be got as well. So yes, it comes down to only about 3% of homes around London in general, but still 3%, right? Yeah. So there is definitely plenty out there. And if they are, like they are often, I mean, I bought a house once. It's part of a longer deal that we did. I won't bore you with it. It was quite a cool little deal, but it made the guy liquid, right? He had this house. He had a £7,000 mortgage against it. He'd had for a long time. The house had been. This is why I shouldn't have done a deal with him. He'd had this house for 17 years, and he'd only rented it for 1 month of that 17 years, and that was to his brother who didn't pay any rent, so he chucked him out. Right now it's derelict. Yeah, and it was sitting there. It was worth about 80 grand in the condition that it was in. In the way we were doing the deal, gave him the 80 grand for the property. So that generated revenue for him so that we could go on and do the other deal that we were doing. I spent 30,000 quid on that property, brought it back to life, and now 4 people it's let to a registered provider of social housing who houses 4 people on a move-on style scheme whereby they've been in rehab or something like that, and then they're moving on back towards independent living and becoming contributory members of society again, rather than people who need to live off the state. I'm not going to apologise for that to anybody. No. I'm really pleased with that. Right? I'm very, very happy with that. And look, you could criticise me for saying, well, it's all commercial. To be honest, if I let that as a professional HMO, I'd make more money. So don't tell me I'm only doing it for the money, right? But I've created that unit. I brought that back from the dead. Much more sustainable than building new stuff out the ground and pumping loads of concrete into it. And I've done this hundreds and hundreds of times. So I'm a pain in the backside for someone like Shelter, because the only stuff I've ever bought really has been tenanted and illegal, non-compliant, whatever, has to get sorted, right? Or derelict, badly needs refurbishment. I've done that hundreds of times over. So I've added those units back into, I've either made them legal, compliant, safe, the tenant is much happier, right? Or I have brought something back that wasn't in a livable state, certainly would fail a housing HHSRS check, right? And I'm proud of that. I'm not expecting a knighthood anytime soon for what I'm doing, right?
Sir Adam Lawrence.
But so that's got a nice ring to it, hasn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm not. No one's ever going to tell me that I'm on the evil side of things. And look, if there's one charity I support in the sector, it's Crisis. Because again, coming back to the doing versus pontificating, they house homeless people, and that is so important. They help homeless people get into homes versus some of the other charities in the sector who are actually just lobby groups with people paid 6-figure salaries for pontificating and talking about stuff, but lobby groups don't help anyway. I was actually quite positive about this government coming in, not because I thought they'd build 1.5 million homes, but I went to the conference in 2024 up in Liverpool and went to all the housing events, or as many of the housing events as I could, which was sort of on the fringes. And all the ministers that I met, there's quite a few who'd grown up in temporary accommodation and things like that. I thought that gives them some real unique insight, but not with a chip on their shoulder about it. And then I heard the lobby, because a lot of, obviously, in those environments, they're not expecting the me's of the world to be there. And obviously, I generally keep my head down, right? Although I can't help ask a couple of questions because that's my way. Usually wait till the end in case anyone descends on me. But then there are people there from your lobby groups like your Generation Rents and things like that, and you hear their mindset and their mentality, and you think, you're just going to destroy. This isn't good for, by thinking that you know what's best for people, right? And that's such an arrogant place to be, right? They're all chasing shadows and spectres of the evil landlord. Look, are there bad landlords? Sure. Are there bad tenants? Sure. Is it about the same percentage? Yeah, it probably is. Somewhere between 3% and 10%, I'd say, right? They are. And they need, that's why regulations exist. I'm all for a free market which has some guardrails in. An unfettered free market is not good for the 99.99% of people because the 0.01 will suck everything out of it, right? They'll do that. That's why you need regulation with teeth. But telling the tenant what they need to do and how important it is for there to be a national landlord register at the cost of 400 million quid with no measurable benefit to the tenant, where that cost will be primarily loaded onto the tenant because that's how supply of anything works and services work, while rental stock's evaporating, is very damaging. So I think that probably put the world to rights on that front, Dylan, unless you want to push any of that around. But
I'm actually going to come back to that a bit later.
Okay,
I've got a cool question I haven't heard anyone ask you later, so I think you'll enjoy it.
I will.
But what I wanted to ask you, just going back a little bit, was you, when you started out, so you came out of, you were doing some gambling thing. Can you just talk into that? But then what took you into property specifically? What was that moment that, was there an aha moment or what happened there?
Great question. Yeah. So I've been very wary of the phrase gambling, because what I really did was I took the gambling out of gambling. I didn't invent this. This was just, it was the early days of the internet when I left university. And one of the things I started playing poker. Yeah. Terrible timing. Are
you a good poker player then?
I'm pretty reasonable. Pretty
I've got a table on a Sunday night, but I'd be scared to play you in poker. I just feel like you'd demolish us.
I'll tell you this story, and you won't want me. You won't want me to come, because I'm quite a good reader of people, as well as being mathematically fairly acute. So pretty dangerous, really. It depends how much alcohol there is as well, though.
Yeah.
So if
we'll get you plenty.
Unlimited alcohol. Yeah, you bring me. I'll be a nice soft touch. That'd be great.
Yeah.
But early days of internet poker. And I discovered it, like I said, a few weeks before my final exams. And I turned $50 into $1,600 pretty quickly. And I thought, I'm good at this. But then with the enthusiasm of a 21-year-old, I thought, well, I'm never going to need to go to work. I can play cards for a living. And part of that was, you talked about university earlier, and I think I kind of went around the question a bit, not deliberately, but I was never happy. I didn't sit right in Oxford University. I don't know why. Well, I do know why, because I'm a bit different, right? And I didn't sit right at all with people and I hadn't worked that hard to get there. I'm really sorry to say it on camera. Mom, if you're listening, I apologise, but I didn't need to. I walked in through the front door. It is what it is. I don't think that would happen these days so much, but it did. And so because I hadn't worked that hard for it, guess what? I didn't value it as much as I should have done, right? And actually, university for me came about getting through university and having the piece of paper at the end. I was predicted a first. I got a 2-2. If any regrets I do have, it probably is that. And so when I did my MBA, I made sure I got it right, and I was top of the year. I delivered what I should have done when I was at Oxford. Almost got a 2-1, and that would have been criminal if I got a 2-1, because some finals exams I read a book the night before for the first time. Right. So I went into an exam with a very, very loose idea.
What is your IQ then? You must be off the charts.
I'm reasonably. I mean, I did a test when I was about 13, and I scored like north of 150.
Okay.
So, but there are. Once you're at about 3 standard deviations above the mean, it does become notoriously difficult to measure. And when you're 13, the measurement is different than when you're an adult. So I haven't done one, because the only ones you see these days are on Facebook, and I'm not sure they're scientifically robust still.
Meta's version,
workable. Probably top 1%, I think. Maybe, I don't know how much further than that. But yeah, I didn't find it. I've got good retention. I read fast. I have a few other inherent advantages with things like that. So I was more interested in playing poker than doing anything else, to be honest. And I should say, I learned from. So I was influenced heavily when I was brought up by my maternal grandparents. As I said, they were the ones who my grandfather was recruited from Hatton Garden to go to Birmingham, and that's why their side of the family was in Birmingham. And they were both my grandparents, gamblers. Right. And we would go to the football club on a Sunday. And I was always, my nan would have £30 budget to put in the fruit machine. And the fruit machine those days, you could win £100, right? So I remember this distinctly. One of my very clear memories from childhood. I was 11 years old, and she put her £30 in, and she lost her £30. And to be fair to her, she'd always stop, which if you are a recreational gambler, you need that limit. Yeah. And £30 is a lot of money in those days. It was a lot of money. But they were, my granddad was a spender. He died with like £3 in the bank. Really clever. Lived his life. Brilliant. Lived his life. Fantastic. So put her £30 in. She left it. And I don't know why that day specifically, but my granddad, I remember he pressed £2 coins into my hand. And he said, "Go on, son, have a go." So I was tiny, like I said, when I was 11. I had to have a stool. I mean, wouldn't be allowed to do it these days. You probably weren't allowed to do it then, but I did. It was like it was the late 1980s. And put the £2 in the slot. Press the button. So 4 reels on this machine, right? Old school machine. £3 coins came in. And I was looking around for it where it was, and it was like, oh, it's £2. So I thought, well, that's good. I've got the £2 back, so I'm not going to lose. And it had a repeat chance, and I pressed the button, and it said yes. And then it spanned the 4th reel round, and the £4 coin came in. And I was looking around all the fruits and things. I thought, well, what's that then? And it's, cash pot, £100. Now, imagine that at 11 years old. Now, my nan came straight in, took her 30 quid back, gave 30 quid to my granddad. I got 30 quid, and my brother, who at the time was 6, got a tenner, which I was most upset about. Like, why's he got money?
That's
What's he getting money for?
Yeah.
But £30 for £102 out for £2 in. Obviously, that made an impression. And because they were always like, we would walk up in the days when we relied on the bus and things like that. Like I said, we didn't have a lot of money. And we would go, and there was a cafe in Shirley, which is near Solihull, which is a part of Solihull. And my nan would go in there. We'd go for a cup of tea, which was because they had a fruit machine in there. And she'd always want to go in and play the fruit machine. So I was exposed to this stuff from a young age. Yeah. When I was about 16, I could pass for 18. I used to go into the local amusement arcade. And for the first few weeks, I lost all the money that I had. I was just chucking money down the back of slot machines. But I didn't like losing. Like I said, the way I'm really wired, I like winning and stuff, regardless of the financial incentive. I just don't want to do inherently, I don't like doing a bad job. So I then saw, like you do, I observed there was a guy who used to be in there who seemed to win all the time. So I spent hours and hours watching him, got to talk to him, and he threw me a few tidbits, and he did win. And he was actually a professional slots player. He made his living playing slots, right? And so I learned stuff, and then my brain iterated it itself, and I had a network of people around me. So when I was at university, I was very lucky. It was the last year of no fees. Right, so I went in 97, so it's before the tuition fees kicked in then. And there was still, because my family weren't very well off, I still had a grant. But where my grant stopped and the small amount of money my dad could afford to give me, he couldn't afford to give me the amount that they deemed he couldn't. So I was short even before the term started on rent. So I had a job in a pub. And I used to, now Oxford, you work 8-week terms. Sometimes you go the week before, but you've got 24 weeks. You're 28 weeks.
Crazy.
Absolutely mental, right? Yeah. Mental. But it is extremely intense when you're there. It wasn't that intense for me because I didn't work that hard, unfortunately. But it should have been. Should have been very intense. And so I had 28 weeks a year to work at the pub. That's how I saw it. And I would go and get as many shifts as I could. I would NLP people into giving me their shifts because I'd be like, you don't want to work Friday night, Dave, do you? Why would you do that? Friday night, you want to be out with the lads, don't you? Come in and knowing there'd be good tips and stuff like that. And I'd work the 8-hour shift. And so I would work up to 60, 70 hours a week if I could when I was not at university.
So you do have sales tactics in there.
Be careful. Grandmaster sales. Yeah. I think it was work ethic. My brother was wired the same way. So we would always, when after university, I was working back at the pub for a bit. And I got him a job as a glass collector, and he had the same. So something somewhere in our upbringing, I think, had given us that sort of level of work ethic. Because I figured out pretty early on, if you work in a pub and you're working Friday, Saturday night, it means you're not out Friday, Saturday night spending money. And I used to do quite a lot of that, just different with family life these days and things like that. But it was a double win. It was a double win. So played poker. Got to this sort of $1,600, fairly convinced I was going to be one of the best in the world, as you do, sort of knocking along, not realising. A seminal point was I played a free roll for the World Series, and I was at maybe 21 and a half, I think I was. And the top 3 got a seat, and I came 4th in that free roll, so I didn't get in, and I was gutted. And I used to play cash poker at a local casino. I lived in Nottingham at the time for a short while, and I used to play cash games. And one thing I didn't understand, despite someone who's quite mathematically acute, is the concept of bankroll management. And I didn't have mentors. The internet was there, but you didn't use it in the same way. And there were forums in those days. You had to wade through all these threads and things like that. And it was difficult to know who to trust. And I was young and I was arrogant and I thought I could do anything. So I didn't learn like I could have learned, and I didn't realise I was putting myself in very high variance situations at which one turn of a card would make a difference of hundreds of pounds. I didn't have a huge bankroll, so I couldn't handle it. So I then reverted back to playing slots for a while. And I had a year when I made maybe 30, 35k profit cash, not taxed because there's no income tax on gambling.
On slots or poker?
Both. In the UK, both.
Wow.
No, there's never been. HMRC have been and tried to nibble at this over the years. But there's still no income tax on gambling as long as it is gambling.
Yeah.
And then I found a new way. So one of the, sometimes life throws something at you and it's how it works out. So I used to work this job in a pub. I used to work for a friend of mine who now works with me still today in our property management business. And we were coming back from work 1-2 o'clock in the morning because there'd been a function. It was late and my friend was driving. We were in a Ford KA and this guy, we're going up this road, suburban road, roundabout, saw a car and it was all, I don't know if you've ever been in one of these situations, but suddenly everything starts going slow motion.
Yeah.
And this car was doing maybe 70, 80 miles an hour on a 30 mile an hour road. And my friend sort of saw it, slowed down, start to swerve the car a bit. So we were probably at about 15, but this car hit like an island where a little outcrop would come out and he didn't see it. It was dark and whether he was high or whatever was going on. But so he went straight into this outcrop. The car took off and like implanted itself in our bonnet, right? And felt the airbags deployed, obviously. Felt the pain in your chest if you've ever been in a car crash when the seatbelt. And I remember I had like a bullseye bruise on my chest for weeks and weeks afterwards. But
it takes a while.
First thing I thought, like obviously in the heat of the moment, I thought I'm going to get out because the car had gone onto the pavement. I thought, right, I'm going to get out and give this bloke a piece of my mind. / I'm going to hit him, to be honest with you. And then I put my left ankle on the floor and collapsed because my left ankle had completely gone. What happened is all my ligaments had gone, but I couldn't feel it because of the adrenaline. And I always remember this is like 100 yards from my mum and dad's house. This is where they still live today. So I drive past this all the time and think about that time. And I also think about the lady who very kindly came out, gave us a blanket. She was a nurse. And then the paramedics arrived and like paramedics do, black humour sort of stuff. They were like, oh, looking at those tyre tracks, we thought this would be body bags, lads. You've done well here. And it's kind of like, I don't think we've done well here. I mean, but of course, the guy who had the crash, he just got out of the car scot-free. We'll never know whether anything happened to him or not. But I mean, what a bloody idiot.
Yeah.
But that was a real life changer. So what that meant was I couldn't do my pub job and I couldn't play machines. I couldn't stand up for 8 weeks, right? Couldn't put any weight on it. Crutches, but they said, look, you've got to stay off it. It was one of those, you'd have been better off if you broke it. So I've never gone back to like impact running or anything. I used to run quite a lot. Can't really do it because my body's not up to it. So I have to do like cross training and things like that. That's very low impact. Stopped playing rugby, stopped all of that. But while I was laid up for 8 weeks, it gave me the chance to look into something I'd wanted to spend some time looking at, which is the concept of sports arbitrage. So basically, in a simple way, if England are playing Australia at cricket, and bear in mind we're going back to the relatively early days of the internet, in the English bookies, they would have a short odds on England, shorter than they should be, and long odds on Australia, because everyone's going to bet England. They're not thinking about the price, they're thinking about the outcome. In Australia, it would be the other way around. So what you would do is you would go and bet on England at an Australian bookie and Australia at an English bookie, and mathematically it would have to work, but there would be an overlay or what's called an arbitrage. So I got into that over these 8 weeks. I'd completely skint at the time, used to spend my money back then, definitely. Did have a house, but it was one of those where we'd self-certed for the mortgage, I must say, right? So I had no clue what was going on. The broker just did it. We bought the house from the broker and he gave us $5,000 off for letting us do the mortgage. So I don't know what his proc fee was for doing it, but he did really well. So we were lucky like that in a way. And I got my deposit by getting a graduate loan at the time. So my degree did do something for me on that front because I had no money. But I borrowed $10,000 off my nearest and dearest, 4 people, $2,500 each. And by the end of that 8 weeks, when I was allowed to put weight on it again, I'd made $10,000. Wow. And so I paid him back the $10,000. I had a $10,000 float and I started flying with that stuff. Now, these were the days where you could honestly see an opportunity and make a cup of tea, come back, take your time, put a couple of bets on, and it was still there. In today's world, it moves like you can imagine. There's bots, there's this, there's that. And bookmakers have to close you down. So I've been closed down by thousands and thousands of bookmakers, lots and lots of different accounts, banned from a lot of places across the internet. It wasn't scalable. It wasn't sustainable. I ran a cash betting operation because once your name can't bet, cash is anonymous. So I ran it alongside my brother. Thought it would go on for maybe 18 months. It went on for about 5 years. And the opportunities were still there, but they got nerfed quite significantly, as the kids would say. So that was my experience in effectively running a gambling syndicate. And I was a trader. but I was like a baby version of a stock market trader, but I would pretty much never lose. I was an arbitrage trader. So, sort of thing that Nick Leeson did, but when Nick Leeson made a mistake, he put it in a secret account that then blew up and sent an investment bank bankrupt. So it was fascinating, but it was never supposed to be a career. It was never supposed to be something. It was a side hustle that got out of control, really. That the obsessive mind takes over. And because I'm wired the way I am, I shared profits with everybody who worked with me. And because it was I definitely had an issue with trusting people. I couldn't go on the internet and say, "Oh, I have found a way we can make some quite good money," because I was worried about who would steal the IP and things like that. So lots of my family and friends made lots of money out of that as well, or certainly at the time what felt like lots of money. And it was a nice side hustle for all of them as well. So put some money in some banks and probably paid down some mortgages for people and stuff like that. So that was coming to an end. For me anyway. I felt it was towards the end of the road, about 2011. And so I had sort of happily been an observer of the 2008 crash in a way, although I did own a house that I bought in 2006 with the wrong partner. It was a new build at the top of the, and we paid the sticker price. I mean, it couldn't have gone any worse, right? And then we split in 2008, and then kind of noticed, oh yeah, this financial crisis thing is going to be a problem. So we couldn't get anywhere near the price that we paid. So we rented it. And that was my first rental. So accidental landlord, 2008, used an agent. They ripped us off. I sacked them in 2009 and said, look, I'll do it myself. And then, so 2011, things had calmed down quite a lot, as you might remember. The market was very, very flat. Still, there wasn't, but rents were fairly strong. There was a big amount of rental demand because a lot of people then couldn't get mortgages, so they needed and wanted to rent. And so it made sense to me that I just looked in a really quite simple way and said, look, 2011, these houses are the same price if you get shopped around and got a deal. And of course, I knew enough to know I needed deals that I can buy them at in 2004. Well, it strikes me that 7 years will come back at some point, or at least will sort of revert to the mean. And there was lots of stuff under 100K at the time around Birmingham. Solihull's always been quite expensive, so it didn't really make a lot of sense. But going a bit further out did make sense. And I was able to remortgage my house I was then in at the time. Took about 160 grand out of that. That was my starting pot. So like a lot of people started with a remortgage pot, but blew through that really quickly on deposits. And then was like, oh, I've got a couple of grand a month's worth of cash flow. And that's it. I've got no capital. So what do? Then learn how to partner with people, how to do all that sort of stuff. So really, the gambling side of it was really, I would call risk management. It was risk management. And everything I've done really has had some element of that risk management involved, because I think that risk management is part of my passion. And mispriced risk. I love, that's what every deal is a mispriced risk, right? Now, sometimes you've mispriced it and you carry the can for that, right? But sometimes the vendor, the market, the agent has mispriced it. And this is what people, I think, don't understand about. Well, look, I can say with certainty, I didn't understand this. And I remember I read Simon Zucchi's Property Magic. I was at a property meeting, someone gave it to me. And I thought, interesting. What did I not understand when I read it? Why would anyone sell a house for less than it's worth? Couldn't get, again, it's mindset blockers, isn't it? And he kind of did a reasonable job in the book, I think, if I remember correctly, about kind of explaining. And I thought, that does make a bit of sense. I mean, he's missed a few bits out. He didn't talk about legal fees. But the concept does make sense. So I thought, right, so I'm going to need to go and find out some of these motivated sellers. And so I started in the old-fashioned way of tramping the streets, trying to find deals, talking to agents, working with agents, and that's how I deployed that first bit of capital that I had in a joint venture with people who, I met two guys. One of them was the father of a friend of mine. They had 10 properties, including 2 HMOs. And I thought, that's the biggest portfolio in the world. These guys must be able to teach me so much. And that's why I worked with them and protected, because I was quite savvy on the corporate side, used limited companies from day one, even though brokers and things said, what are you doing? And it's kind of, but at the time, the mortgage landscape was such that it was pretty difficult to borrow over about £1.5 million. And I had bigger ambitions than that. So I thought, I need to be in a company. And at the time, the prevailing advice, in inverted commas, was use deeds of trust, which again, HMRC are not uncomfortable with. But there was a big premium on limited company mortgages in those days, whereas these days we don't do it that way because it's not clean. We just put it in the company because again, proper advisors don't like that route. Not that I've ever had a problem with it. You know, they've always been on the right balance sheet in the accounts, and I've unwound all that now anyway. It's all long sold and paid the corporation tax on everything as well. So that's how I sort of got into. So that's how sort of gambling then morphed into property. And timing, you know, it was good. It was a flat markets are the best of them all. Now I know certainly Milton Keynes, London specifically, definitely wasn't flat at the time. It was very, very buoyant, and people were making huge. And I started to pay a real interest because I thought at the time, I don't know anyone in London. You know, I don't know if I could buy in London. I don't know if I could do all of this. Shall I just stick to the knitting? And then I thought, I'm getting better yields. You know, I am getting better yields. And then by the time I really even thought about raising capital, getting with investment partners and stuff, it was more like 2013, 14. And I was looking and thinking, well, this market can't go on like this at double digits a year. It's not a sustainable bubble. And I wasn't as in tune with the economic stuff back then. So I wasn't thinking about what the Bank of England were going to do. And you know, Mark Carney had quite a thing about landlords and how much they might influence the market if there was another crash. And there was a lot of stuff done on that in the mid 2010s. And that's when they introduced the rules around debt service cover and things like that, which were one of the things that started to make more problem for younger, newer investors in London. I also think it's harder to get deals. I've definitely had London shut me out a few times when I've been close to a deal. And there's a lot more, if you have to compete against, like Solihull, you have to compete against unencumbered piles of cash that people have got. They've got what I call a capital allocation problem. They've got so much money, they need something to do with it, right? I don't have that problem, sadly, right? I have a problem. I need to recycle. I need to build cash flow. I need to recycle. So very different proposition. But if I've got to borrow it at 12% or whatever, and they've got to borrow it at 0%, I'm behind the eight ball. I'm not going to be able to pay what they can pay.
Absolutely.
Right? So yeah.
Can you just, in line with that, so when you started out, you said your ambition was more than 1.5 million at that time.
Yeah.
What did you, I mean, how big did you see yourself going at that point? Obviously, without these like set goals, or did you at that time have this idea that, okay, there's a figure I want to get to? And then can you just talk into as well, in line with that, is how the difference between numbers of property and cash flow versus equity?
Absolutely,
you know, just to explain to the audience, because I think people get confused by that sometimes. They just hear someone's, you know, from Wales saying, I've got a 10,000 properties.
Yeah.
Someone in London's got 50. You know, just explaining.
But they're in Mayfair.
Absolutely.
And look at the value of them. Absolutely. So very much so. So I definitely swallowed the. So I one of the first things, because I'm quite impatient and impetuous and over optimistic as well. I want to see the good in people. I started going to the property networking scene. I went to a couple of the corporate ones that were around at the time, 2011. I didn't identify with them. They were too hardcore salesy environment. I didn't like the push into the sales funnel. I saw what was going on and thought, these are not for me. Went to a couple of independent meetings, met some great people. But generally speaking, as you know, there would tend to be a similar speaker. Some of those speakers rotated through that circuit. And so I looked, I saw, but I left the credit card at home because I knew how impetuous I was. And I was like, I'm going to spend 6 months just listening, talking, meeting people, hopefully, which I did, met some great people at those meetings. And that's why I never did any training to start myself. I thought, I'm just going to learn by doing it. This is the way that I'm going to go about it. And so, but I definitely swallowed a few of the hooks that they put out there, like, I'm sure at the time the 10,000 a month was a thing. And I was like, well, that sounds good. Why not? But what a stupid thing, because I've let someone else set my goal, right?
Absolutely.
But you only realize when you get there and you start to think more strategically about this sort of stuff. So that definitely was an initial goal. But then when I realized, and when I went through that period, as I say, part of that building block was that period I told you about earlier, where I got to the early October and I'd done my goals for the year and just thought, don't know what it was to me, buy 4 houses or something maybe. Like, there we go, all done. What am I going to do? Bit boring, yeah. Better rethink this whole thing. And then part of, as you learn, as I think as you go on, you're like, I'm accountable and responsible for setting my own structure, just as I am my own goals, just as I am my own systems and processes, and all the rest of that, right? So I have to do all of that on my own. And I turned my attention more to building the system so that the system worked. So I came up with this concept years ago. Like all my stuff, it's somewhat dry and strategically very interesting. I don't know if you've ever seen it. Actually, I must revisit it again. I revisit it occasionally because it's so useful. It's still so useful today. And it was born from a place that I heard the same thing again and again. All you need in this game, son, is deals and money. Deals and money, deals and money, deals and money. And it didn't feel right? But I couldn't tell you why. And then one of those semi-eureka moments one day was, because I've been doing it for a few years. I was like, it's not right. It's not right. What else do you need? Well, you need to be able to transfer the imperfect if presumably you're getting a deal because the asset is not optimized. Yeah? Which is 90+% of deals. You do get the occasional one that's perfect and the seller's motivated and jolly good. We've taken it over and day one, it's perfect. Pretty rare, right? Pretty rare. You don't normally see too much of that stuff. So what have we got to do? Well, we've got to make it right. There might be a refurb. That might be a legal thing. There might be all sorts of stuff. So I kind of settled on optimization as the word that covered that. And I was like, so that's the third. You've got to be able to optimize. And then after I'd done sort of 30 deals, I thought, right, what's the common threads? What do they look like? Because I keep doing them, but it's not systematic. They're coming up. I'm not really in control of them. You know, I'm just putting myself in the right place at the right time, and I'm doing a lot of legwork, which is meaning that it's happening for me. So I thought, right, let's look at these deals. And the one common thread was they'd been managed very poorly from an asset management and property management perspective. So people had done that typical thing that they do, where they do a refurb, and then they leave it 15 years. They don't really do anything, and then they're surprised at the end when the roof is leaking and this is wrong and that's wrong. And then they're surprised when they have to sell it below market value. Well, it's because you haven't reinvested in the property, right? It's a wasting asset. So if you don't have OPEX, you will always get hurt. Your HMO looks fantastic 3 months after a refurb, and it might need another refurb 3 years after the refurb, right? Depending on tenant type and all the rest of it. So that stuff needs to be priced in. So I was then happy that those, I call them my four pillars of property, or 4 pillars of property investment, that I had deals, money, financial structuring, really, a bit more than just money, how you structure the deals from a financial perspective, optimization, asset management and management, right? And then I had my 4 pillars, which I turned into a talk. When I first got asked to talk on the property circuit, that was the first talk that I gave. I was like, right, I want to reveal to you it sounds like I'm a high-level consultant, but here are my 4 pillars of property investment. And people loved it. Some people didn't. Some people thought it was boring, which it probably is. But it's rich in terms of what it contains. And I wrote the talk and the whole strategic framework from the point of view of it's as useful to you with 0 or 1 properties as it is if you've got 10,000. Because my contention is you can put every bit of your business into this framework. And then what I started to do was look, and this was really facilitated by the fact that I did my MBA. So it changed the way that I think about business. So, and if I'd done that MBA 10 years earlier, goodness knows what would have happened. But I didn't, so don't worry about it. And I realized that what stopped people in growth, in business, not just in property, was either appetite or competence. And competence is the hardest one to swallow. You're not good enough to break through that barrier, right? But sometimes you just need to start going around the problem. And what I did was I mapped out where my bottlenecks were going to be, were currently now, and were going to be over the next 12 months. And that was really powerful because 9 months ahead, I'd realized, well, you're going to be completely out of money at that stage, right? So what do we do then? Well, we start raising money now. And these days, I know that really you're just raising money all the time, right? Because you should be in a position, I'm in a position whereby if I do a deal, it stacks up if I borrowed all the money, right? I might use my own money, I might not. But it has to be, I use it as a guardrail for myself. If you can't borrow all the money and make the deal stack, it's not a deal. That's where it needs to be. So raise money now, keep your money in the bank. And people might think, that's a bit strange. Why would you pay someone 10% or 8% or whatever if you're getting money, if your money's in the bank? You're losing money that way. But no, you're gaining liquidity is what you're doing. So if then the one comes up, I had one this year, Wednesday. So this deal had come to me the week before, and I'd said to the guys, there was a good discount, but the yield wasn't there, and the vendor had signed a horrible 5-year guaranteed rent agreement with someone, right? It just didn't make any sense. And it was a low yield that meant they were going to get really, really punished for this. And I said to the trader who bought it to me, I said, look, I'm not going to offer because it's going to be insulting for people and it's not going to work. And there we go. I'm tens of thousands off where the vendor wants to be, given that the vendor thinks they've already discounted it. Trader rang me back a week later and said, I might want to have another look at this one. He really wants to go. Where would you be ultimately? And so I gave him a number. And he said, well, that's good because we're 20 grand under that. Now, he knows me well. He knows that I'm not the sort of person who's then going to go, well, in that case, I'm taking 10 more grand. I'm like, well done, mate. How do you want the 20 grand? But he's like, here's the catch, 2-day completion. Oh, okay. So prep the lawyers. Obviously, my lawyers are pretty good. They're on the end of WhatsApp and all the rest of it. Yeah, we'll do it. No problem. Get it done. Bang. Exchange the next day, completed the day after. So those ones are out there for soup. Would I have been able to do that if I didn't hold that liquidity? I'm not getting a bridge on that. Right? Or if no, don't get me wrong. I could get a bridge. Be 4% a month for that sort of level of service speed.
Yeah.
So do I want the 4% a month or do I want the cash on the hip? And because I know the bridge as well, what I do in those situations is put the requisition in and then when it completes, re-bridge it relatively quickly afterwards anyway. So the bridger could act within 2 weeks and my cash is only out the door for, once again, it stacks up because at 100% financing, if I'd borrowed all the money, it would stack up.
Yeah.
So works really well. So that way of thinking, and that I would encourage people, if you take one thing away from this conversation, think about where your bottlenecks are in advance. But you've got to be quite hard on yourself. You've got to be willing to, if your bottleneck is, I don't want to work that hard anymore, right? Okay. I get into funny conversations with people these days where they start by apologising to me. And they apologise to me because they say, I don't want to do as many deals as you've done. And I think I haven't come from the place where I must do 1,000 deals to validate myself or 10,000 deals. I'd like to do 10,000 because I think it'd be quite cool. But the point is I built the system and the machine and I've given people employment doing that and I'm bringing units back into use and I'm giving people homes that I'm proud to give them. I'm not giving it to them. I'm renting it to them. I get that. And there are some people who will be always ideologically opposed to my existence on this planet, right? But I don't care about those people. So I'm happy with what I'm doing and I think I'm doing some positive good. So why would I stop doing it? Not because I've got to some arbitrary number or not. And of course, to scale massively, you need huge investment. You know, Amazon, not that I'm comparing myself to Amazon, to be clear, to good old Jeff, but 20 years before they made a profit because he used the money for scale before he started making accounting profits. Then when he flicked the switch, I think they made 2.2 billion in their first profitable quarter or whatever. And these days they make, into the tens of billions, hundreds of billions a year. So that's how you scale it. To scale a business, you are capital hungry and you need to put everything back in if you want to do that. And also that's quite efficient from a taxation perspective because if you're making losses, it's not going out the door to HMRC. It's going back into other deposits and refurbs and all the rest of it so you can grow faster. And that compound interest makes more difference.
And I think something that you've said there is so important, again, for people to understand, because I had a friend's dad said this recently to him. He said, if Dylan was so wealthy, why would he need to still be raising money?
Yeah.
That's a common thing that I hear from people who don't understand the game and that kind of thing. So I wonder if you could just explain that to people. Is that, okay, you've got 700 properties currently that you're holding.
We're in the 650s, I think, at the moment, something like that.
650, okay, 650, 700, and can you just talk into two things? Firstly, is how much debt is that?
Yeah.
And how do you, because some people are so scared of taking on debt, but how do you sleep well at night knowing that you've got that much debt, if you're happy to share that figure?
Absolutely, yeah.
And then secondly, looking at terms of when you're scaling and the importance of scaling, especially in the current environment we're in, that the days of having 2 or 3 properties, for a private landlord, I think are gone. And if you
could be in Mayfair, they could be in Mayfair, and they could be £1 million each.
Absolutely, but that scale, to get the economies of scale, I think is so important because with what you've taught and that asset management thing, again, your supplement changed our lives.
Yeah.
Both, me and friends, we implemented that.
Yes.
Because we used to treat property as just leave it, let it carry on. When there's a problem, you'll be told about it. Reactive.
Yeah.
But that proactive thing, actually, we maximize rents now.
Yeah.
And so it's taught us to be more disciplined, all those things.
Yeah.
But if you could just talk into the debt side and also, how you scale and why it's so important to do.
Absolutely. The debt side, that's relatively easy conversation. Thick end of 40 million quid.
Okay.
How do you sleep well at night? Well, little do you know, when Liz Truss is in charge, not very well. Not very well at all. But that's because you can't see the end of the black hole when the markets are going against you like that. Now, I say that. I did lose sleep over that period, but nowhere near as much as I would have done had I not done the work I'd done in 2022. Because I was sitting there going, wow, those 200 mortgages that I broke and refixed, I have saved our group many millions of pounds, and it's kept us solvent. Now, it hasn't made us money because we're still paying a higher rate than we were, and we had ERCs, but my goodness me, compared to where we would have been, it was a huge, and we would have had to sell. We would have had to sell properties. We would have had to sell them, a fairly significant number of them, I think. I was already doing a bit of selling for a couple of reasons, actually, just as an aside. One of them, because I had a very fixed mindset, never sell. Why would you ever sell? It's hard work to get it, never sell it. But then in 2021, when prices were going mad, I was like, I'd sell at that price. Well, why don't I? Let's sell it as something organically becomes empty. Let's give it a go. Sold some stuff. Couldn't believe the prices we were getting. It was like, well, we'll sell some more. We'll sell some more. Fine.
Yeah.
And then as I started to, my clarity around inflation and interest rates started to form more and more, I was like, well, we're going to need to sell some in the new world here because we're going to get to a point where if we're not releasing that capital, you know, how are we going to balance the books if we're going to keep growing? So I'll come back to that. So to finish off the bit around the debt side of things, I think I did flippantly listen to someone say once, which is another one of those guru things, you know, if you owe the bank £1,000, it's your problem. If you owe them 100 million, it's their problem. And I think I took that a bit too seriously. But ultimately, it is asset backed. It is under 60% loan to value. So that helps me quite a lot. I've got quite good. So pre-truss moment, I would have a pretty nice looking pipeline of mortgages that dropped off every month and they'd be refixed. The point of that was we would never get to an interest rate seismic event like a 2000, like a Black Wednesday or something maybe, and get stuffed by the interest rate because we had a huge loan that was ending. And I know our mutual friend was in that exact boat, and thank goodness that he listened to what I said in the supplement, right? Saved a lot of money, probably saved a lot of people's tenancies apart from anything else. So that side of things was fairly workable. I always thought there would be a way around the interest rate normalization. I didn't necessarily see what was going to play out with that much clarity, but every risk I can control, I do. So I was at a meeting in Cambridge in 2015, and I was listening to quite a prominent speaker who's got a very good reputation in the industry, clever guy. And he said, what's the biggest risk to investors this year? Muggins here puts his hand up. He's always happy to be loud. Interest rate. And the whole room sort of turned around and looked at me like with this eye. Because remember, 2015, I mean, rates were on their backside. You know, bond yields are very, very low. And I said, but it's always the number one risk because it's the only one you can't control. The only one you can't. Now, you can by opting out and being unencumbered. That opts you out of the interest rate risk. You're still exposed to it because if it goes too high, property prices go down. So bear that in mind. But that was and lots of people, I had a few interesting conversations off the back of that comment in that room. And I hadn't really thought it through myself until I said it. And I thought, yeah, that's right. That is because it's all about the risks that you can and can't control. And like I said, everything I've done throughout my patchwork quilt of a career, if you want to call it that, has been risk control and risk management. So this was the one risk to control. So I feel that risk is deeply under control by having, you know, if everything was swiped tomorrow, there'd still be plenty of money. I also have de-risked by having business partners who can run things and do things and have got skin in the game and are good people who can take over in situations if anything happened to me or whatever. So that helps on that side of things. So that helps me sleep at night. Problem shared, problem halved, and all the rest of it. And it's very much, I wouldn't be worried if I owed 500 million. Now, I'm going to say something that might be useful to people who have ambitions of scaling before we come on to the scaling bit that kind of bridges those two very good questions that you've asked me. You get to a stage, I'm there, right, where that sort of level of debt, the thick end of 40 sticks, the banks start to look at you in a different way. And there is, to make it fairly as simple as possible, there is the still really built for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 property landlords, packages or banks, challenger banks that offer buy-to-let product. They lend the money. There's a swap that's going on that people don't necessarily understand. They've swapped the debt out. It's been securitized. It's been sold off probably to somewhere else. They leave you alone for 5 years. They can't recall that debt unless you breach your terms, right? They can't recall it. So that's safe per se. One of the things it did for people in 2008 was not having that level of security and having commercial loans and all the rest of it. And obviously we do use commercial loans. We use some commercial loans. The terms are different. They can force revaluations. They can do this, they can do that. What I always say to people is what you need to do in that circumstance is make sure you have got plenty of cash flow. You need big, as long as you've got big cash flow, you can do it. But you do need to be careful. I do get uncomfortable when people get these blown up commercial valuations on HMOs normally where they couldn't sell it at that price. And it's well above the bricks and mortar price. So you need to be fun. It's a great weapon if you're financially sophisticated. I wouldn't build a portfolio of 100 of those. I would have some diversification. And if they're mega cash cows, you can ride the lightning. There's nothing wrong with, quote me directly on this, there's nothing wrong with 100% LTV if you've got debt service cover of 300%, right?
Absolutely.
You should be fine. You should be fine, especially if you've got multiple. If it's an HMO or a CMO, if you're in the commercial space, I'm pretty comfortable with that. There's still black swans, of course, so you do need to bear in mind.
I think in line with your 4 principles, your 4 pillars.
Yeah.
One of your articles, which was so key for me about 3 years ago, I think you wrote it, where you talked about operational expenses.
Yes.
And the timeline of a roof.
Yes.
And you gave basically a list. I started a spreadsheet at the time.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, if I break this down yearly, what is that actual cost?
Yes.
Because as you scaling, the myth is we do okay because you have money coming in, you're building up, you almost can build a pyramid scheme without realizing it. And the guys I've seen get in trouble have done that. Not because they're bad people.
No.
They just haven't understood that pillar of operational expense and the coverage aspect, because cash flow is so key.
Absolutely. You know? And the age of your, understanding the age of your stock. And then this is without injecting EPCs or this or that into the mixer, right? So things like step changes, shocks to the market can also make significant, big selective. If you have 100 properties and they're all in London and suddenly there's a selective licensing scheme and the license is $2,500 a property, suddenly you need £250,000. You might not have that cash on the hip. Right, you might be making $50,000 a month more, right? You might not have $250,000 sitting in the bank. You should do if you've got that sort, but people don't necessarily. And these are the things that can catch you out. Absolutely. So, gold standard asset management, and this is something that we do. We don't run it to the level that I would like to, because the operating cost of running the system that I would want to build is probably higher than the net benefit of it. And we do an 80% job on this, right, and get the majority, or we do a 20% job and get 80% of the benefits, is what I really mean by saying that. But if we have a property become void, we look at a number of things these days. So do we still want to own property in, so if I gave you an example, I got stuck into South Wales in a big way, 2016 to 2018, because after Brexit, the Wales market got very soft because the conventional wisdom was Wales get a lot of money per head from the EU, therefore Wales is in trouble. I didn't agree with that. Not surprisingly, I'm a difficult person, as you know. I didn't agree with that because I thought, well, it's probably just going to get replaced by the UK, which is largely speaking how it still works, because there's more pressure on Wales and Scotland leaving the UK, which means that they're looked after on that front. But during COVID, Wales did get that capital growth bump I thought it would get. There was also the toll coming off the bridge on the Severn Bridge. And in the UK, we're very funny about tolls. We're not very rational about them. So we don't necessarily behave in the right way. And Bristol was blowing up and has still gone up and up and up since then. So arbitrage, which again is a theme through what I've done, would suggest that if at the time, a 3-bed semi in Newport was 130 grand and a 3-bed semi in an apartment, if you worked in West Bristol, it'd take you as long to get there from East Bristol as it would from Newport, right? And you get a 130 grand house, or you can have a 300 grand house that really isn't that special, right? There's probably going to be some people move because of the toll and things like that. And sure enough, it happened. And I made big overlays in doing that, big capital growth gains in percentage terms. But then when the toll had, and my key bit of information there was, I knew in 2016 the toll was coming off the bridge. It wasn't a state secret, right? But when it came off the bridge, that was the green light for people. So people don't like to anticipate so much. They're not normally, there are early adopters amongst us. We're in a certain part of the bell curve, you know, but they are waiting for things to already be certain. And then there's that saying, you know, if you wait for certainty, it's too late, you know. So people started piling in 2019. Didn't make sense to buy anymore. During COVID, Wales performed better than anywhere else in the country for capital growth. Ergo, you would get to 2021 when I started looking at selling some stuff, and I was like, right, let's have a think about this strategically. Number one, Rent Smart Wales, right? Now, I have an institutional mindset, and if there are things to comply with, then that's probably better for me, and worse for smaller landlords, right? But how do I feel about the politics of the ruling party? Because there is a concern on the far left anywhere of what they might do if Zach Polanski was to win the next election. And I wouldn't dismiss that. I don't think it'll happen, but it's going to be a funny thing with first past the post and a very fractured political system. I'm not looking forward to that run up, Dylan. I'm not going to lie to you. So, Rent Smart Wales, am I happy with would I rather there was no regulation? Normally, as an institutional mindset, you would think I'm happy with the regulation, but I'm not happy with what they do. It's not a good idea. Has it overperformed? Did it do what I thought it would do in 2016? Hell yeah. I've had massive overperformance. Do I think it's still going to continue to overperform? No. And a really simple question, do I see myself owning that asset in 5 or 10 years' time and wanting to? Not really. No, there'll be different stuff. So there's evolution of the portfolio. So actually, ergo, all roads lead to dispose. So let it go and repurpose. And the thing is, again, really simply, let's use a 200 grand example. And I've done this a number of times. So let's say we bought it for 100, it got revalued at 140 years ago, right? So we had 100 grand back out. So great, money out deal, the holy grail, blah, blah, blah. These things are usually very misunderstood by people. And again, it's selling you the smoke rather than the real stuff. Years later, it's now worth 200 grand. However, if I send around a surveyor to do a remo, they will probably tell me it's worth about 185, right? Because the bank loves to suppress, especially if you stay with the same lender. Our data says about 7 to 10% comes off the real value. So I've picked 185, and that's a stupid thing to do because now I've got to do some very difficult maths in my head, and that's why I'm buying time by talking. No, but you're going to pull out, I don't know, 130 something, yeah? So I can pull out 130. Well, I already owe 100, so I can pull out 30 grand. Okay, no tax liability, so it's 30 grand. It's useful, right? Or I actually sell it. I had a real property like this earlier this year, sold it for 203, right? And so 203, I owe 100. I've released 103 grand. Well, that's enough equity to buy a block of flats or something, right? So I can roll up in that way and keep my loan to value down. So my organic pipeline approach of in the old days when you had a steadier market, whereas what we've had is a rocket upwards and then a sidewaysy down in real terms kind of market in the last few years, but still over 5 years, it kind of plays itself out. I knew in 2022 when we took cover and went for those longer loans, I remember saying at the time, in 2027, things will look different. They'll be a bit calmer, and they should be. There's no reason. Well, certainly be calmer than they were in 2022, right? Because it was mad times.
That was mad.
It really was. And we'll be in the middle of a parliamentary term. There shouldn't be huge upheaval. Never know if Rachel Reeves is still around. Let's see what happens, but don't want to tempt fate too much. But you can see why that makes sense as to why you might sell an asset like that. And there's a number of reasons for business cases for doing it. The flip side, people turn around and say, stamp duty is 5%, and there may be a bit more if you're buying stuff more than 125 grand. So frictional costs are high. They are high. But if you can repurpose, if you can sell adequately or well, and one of the things, the number one edge that I've garnered in this game is becoming a really good buyer. So if you can buy really well, it makes sense to do more buying. If you need to sell a few to do a bit more buying, then do that. That's fine. Doesn't mean you become a flipper, trader, whatever. I am an investor. I'm a long-term investor. But because I don't take the money out and buy a Lamborghini when we sell one, it means I then bought something else that I wouldn't have bought otherwise because I wouldn't have had the capital to do it. Or I would have done what you just referred to very intelligently, which is exactly the same as what developers do sometimes. They get themselves into this mindset of, right, first job, refurb, then refurb of 2 semis, then build one out the ground, then build 2, then build 4, then build 8, then build 16, then build 40, then build 100. Market's gone to sleep and it's 2023 and we can't sell them. And now we're stuck. And by the way, the holding costs are 80 grand a month or more than that. And we're bleeding and we're going to lose everything we've ever done. So don't just chase the dragon like that. So if you keep growing the debt bomb, always, if the bomb does go off, and this is why I spent so much time trying to make sure the bomb doesn't go off, which is why we know each other, right? Ultimately, because of the supplement. So I managed to manage that risk when it came up. Let's not pat me on the back too hard because other risks will come up over the next 30 plus years or whatever that I'm still doing this. And hopefully I'll call them right again and I'll be still the best property content in the sector, or whatever very kind things you said earlier on. So you have to think about that side of things very much so. And it comes a little bit back to open-mindedness, I think, in terms of whether you would sell or not, or what and how you would sell. And I think at a bigger strategic end of the spectrum, bringing back in the institutions,
Mm-hmm.
there's an exit to an institution somewhere down the line, potentially, as they start to want to land grab. And of course, the higher that stamp duty goes, because I wouldn't rule out it going 6, 7, 8%. It's 8% in Scotland,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's not going down anytime soon, additional stamp, right?
Mm.
But the purchase of the limited company becomes so much more attractive because it's 0.5% on the value of the shares. And when these institutions get rolling, someone somewhere at some point is going to get a hoover out and start hoovering property limited companies. And then when there's competition, we'll be able to exit at close to bricks or maybe even more. I think that's my prediction over the next 5 to 7 years. I don't say that because I want to go to the beach. I'd be so bored. I like the beach for a few days, a few hours, and then I want to come back, right? So even if I exited, I'd still carry on doing something more of the same that's particularly similar, but those opportunities will be there. So the second half of your original question, I always do this because I can never remember that far back because we've talked for too long, but you were talking about scaling, and I'm big these days on scaling sustainably. Now that sounds a bit boring. It's not very sexy. It's not going to sell anybody any courses or whatever. But ultimately, if you don't scale sustainably, you probably go broke at some point, right? So I think people hear that, and because it doesn't sound that sexy, they think it means slow. It doesn't necessarily mean to be slow at all, right? But it might well be sensible. This is thinking about things like, how's your debt structured? Secured debt, unsecured debt, direct to loans to yourself? What other money have you got in there? What priority stack is there? What's the correct loan to value on your portfolio? So that's one of the reasons why I started disposing of some units, because I was like, this is going to rebalance the LTV. I can't, the model that I operate, single houses primarily, which are either leased, I mean, we do have some blocks of flats and things like that, but generally speaking, bread and butter, single houses that can trade on the open market. So if I want to sell them, I can liquidate them if I want to. It takes a bit of time, or they can go in an auction and you sort of, roughly where you are sort of thing. They've either got PRS tenant in, or they've got a social housing provider style lease arrangement, might be a mini mo or something like that. So big, wide variety of people that we work with. So there's no dependency risk on X or Y organisation. Big, wide variety of geography. So if the Jaguar Land Rover plant in Solihull has a problem, which it did the other month because of the cyber attack to JLR, if your whole portfolio was concentrated in Solihull, at that point you'd been thinking
stuffed.
They were talking about furlough, weren't they? I think they were asking the government for furlough. It's a big deal. So this is what I mean by arbitraging away those risks. You don't get paid for those risks, so don't take them. Still exposed to the interest rate. How do you take that out? You take your LTV down. There's a debt service cover issue. We used to be comfortably in the way above 200%, sometimes up to 300+% on some properties. With the interest rate of 5+, you're not there anymore, right? You're not there. And with your OPEX taking a bigger bite of the cherry, you're not there. So you need to bring the LTV down. That's the bad news. So how are you going to do that? Well, I would put it to you that instead what you might have to do is buy 100 and sell 50, rather than buy 30 and raise a load more debt, or rather than buy 100 and raise a load more debt that puts you in an over-leveraged bomb-style position. Property takes time to vest. Depending on what you're doing to something, there's refurbs, there's this, there's that. What if you get a disappointing revaluation? What if you get this? What if we're sometimes doing, 50 revaluations at the same time in our pipeline? Not all of them are going to work out perfectly. So we don't know with precision whether we've got money. But the way I get around the question that you were asked is I say to people, look, I have this asset. I have this debt against this asset. This asset cash flows this much money. Let's call it £1,000 a month to keep it easy. I've taken into account voids, arrears, this, that. This is a realistic £1,000 a month. Now, I could use £500 a month of that to service debt from you and use your debt to buy more that will then create more, that will then create more, right? So all I'm doing is I'm borrowing from the future or my current cash flows to create more cash flow. You get more money, I get more money. Otherwise, I can't necessarily do that deal because I've got to wait until my capital pot fills back up. So I'm bringing it forward and I'm concentrating it now, and it's a win-win scenario. It's just business. Apple have bonds, BP have bonds, right? Now, it doesn't mean they don't have billions and billions of pounds or dollars. Yeah. So businesses use debt, and I don't want to go and educate your friend's father and talk down to them, but that is the way that this is a business. Absolutely. And businesses use sensible leverage. And I genuinely say this and mean this when I say this to people, I would rather pay you or anybody else than pay a bridging lender, because they don't say thank you, right? And if they come for you, they come for you, yeah? Now, you will be grateful and might well lend it to me again and probably be more flexible, and you might even be more expensive, but you're not really more expensive by the time I've worked out the survey and the monitoring surveyor and the blah, blah, blah. So actually, it might be, there's an arbitrage there for both of us. One of the reasons I've done well buying property off traders, before they understood, luckily, it took the traders a few years to start understanding the stamp duty landscape. It took me about 5 minutes because I realised how important the stamp duty manual was when 2016 came in, right? So I could go around, and then it was 3% in those days, you remember. I could go and say to them, well, instead of you buying it in and this, just sell it straight to me. There's an extra 3% on the deal right there, 1.5% each, right? But those differences at the margin, they make a deal or not a deal. Absolutely. And they saw the logic of that. And they were like, yeah, that's good. Then they found ways to get around the stamp themselves. So not so workable. But it helped me buy at least 100 houses from traders. So I actually turned the tax into an advantage for me and paid a lot of it, but it still worked well, especially when, and like they do, the same thing happened in 2024, landscape changes, tax changes. First thing everybody does, feet up on the table. Let's wait and see what happens. When people who produce summaries of the budget and things like that, who are not economically trained, I'm not trying to be snobby when I say this, right? But they don't know what they're talking about. And all they're doing is they're waiting for other people to do the legwork. I often think, except it would ruin my own reputation, I'll just put something out that's complete nonsense one day, then see who's copied it, because I see people copying stuff that I do all the time, and then call them out and say, I was joking with it. How could you believe that? But I'm not quite that inclined. Yeah. And plus I wouldn't want you to see it and think, oh my God, what's he talking about?
Go change my laugh based on
Exactly.
Yeah, no. So Adam, the time's gone so quickly. We've run out of time this time, but I just want to thank you so much, because there's so much in there that could change people's lives. Velocity of money. There's so many things I'd love to touch on when you're borrowing third-party private finance.
Yes.
The importance of speed and turning that around. But would you mind just closing off with, what advice would you give to your 18-year-old self? Now that you are where you are, you've done what you've done. If you were talking to Adam at 18, what would you be saying?
I would definitely say, make the most of the opportunities that are in front of you. It's not all about whether you go to university or not. I would say that boring stuff I've already said. Make sure you do what you said you were going to do. Don't be evil. I was very sad when Google dropped that as their strapline. I did like that. Don't be evil, because you absolutely don't want or need to be. Be honest. Be honest with yourself. Don't think the world owes you a living, because it doesn't. You don't be entitled, right? Buy some property. I'm nearly 48, so going back 30 years, I wish I'd bought some more. But even now, house prices are at a relative low in inflation-adjusted terms. I write about this quite a bit, right? It's a big soapbox issue for me. But in 5 years' time, 7 years' time, 8 years' time, when house prices are much higher than they are today, people will go, oh, who saw that coming, right? Well, it'll be me. It'll be me who was saying that, because it's there in the data, right? So is it time still to get in? Absolutely. Can you do anything? Absolutely. Find good people to work with. Put some good people around you, right? Don't fall for too many. Work out when someone's selling you something, try and work out what their agenda is, right? And work out whether, doesn't mean you can't trust any of them, but just be careful.
That's so good. And I had a question for you that I'll use on round 2 when we get you back on, because it's going to open up a whole nother world. So we can just tease people. We'll use some marketing tactics here.
I see.
If they sign up to our,
run to the back of the room.
Run to the back of the room. Click that subscribe button. But the one thing, just how do people reach out to you? I know you have a business workshop in London. I'd encourage everyone to go to that. But what do you want to just tell people where to go to find information about that? The supplement as well.
Sure.
How do they sign up? Sure. It will change your life. I can vouch for that.
I distribute all of that through LinkedIn. Cool. So follow me on LinkedIn, Adam Lawrence. Send me a follow request, connection request, whatever. Very open to connecting with people. Publish the supplement weekly, morning on a Sunday. So first thing you can do when you get out of bed, have a look at the supplement. It's a newsletter which you can subscribe to. You can get it emailed to you if you set your LinkedIn settings in the right way. And the property business workshops, we do one a quarter. We sell tickets through our website and through Ticket Tailor. If you Google property business workshop, No one with any marketing nous would use a name that boring to try and sell anything. That's why you know it's ours. So look at Property Business Workshop. Our next one's on 22nd of Jan. Like I say, central London, because it's just easy for everybody from around the country to get to. And we cover things. Next time around, we're covering bookkeeping and financial management. So not as in how to do it and plug it into Xero yourself or whatever, but what it should mean for your business and how you actually interpret what you need to interpret from it. And also, because it's January, we're looking at strategic planning and some productivity stuff. So like you said to me earlier, lots of people say to me, how do you do what you do? Well, I'm going to tell you. I'll tell you my take on that sort of stuff.
Brilliant. So I'd encourage everyone who's watching, please sign up to that. Go to it, just go and listen to as much as you can of this man here, but also do the reading, because the supplement's not an easy read.
It's not, no.
And it's not.
I try, but it's not an easy read. You're right.
You've got to actually apply yourself. I have an economics major degree, and I have to sometimes reread it, just to, because you have to think. And that's what I love about your work. So I just encourage you, thank you for what you've done, what you're doing, and please don't stop, because it is changing lives and it's impacting the world in a good way. So thank you so much for taking the time to come out, and we look forward to having you on early next year.
Well, thank you for the kind words, and thanks for having me.
Cool.